Hey guys, tonight we begin with a moment in American life when brushing your teeth felt more like participating in a science experiment that no one fully understood. Imagine bathrooms lit by faint green glows, parents reassuring their children that a radioactive sparkle meant stronger enamel, and advertisements promising smiles bright enough to guide a ship at night. You stand there with your toothbrush, hearing it fizz gently, wondering if oral hygiene is supposed to hum like that. It is a story of optimism, curiosity, and the kind of blind trust that only happens before everyone realizes what the word radioactive truly implies. So, before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You stand in the quiet bathroom of a modest early 20th century home, the kind with a medicine cabinet that creaks like it has opinions and wallpaper patterned with flowers that never existed in nature. The kerosene lamp on the shelf flickers lazily, casting soft shadows across the porcelain sink. You reach for the little jar on the counter, the one your neighbor insisted was the latest marvel of modern hygiene. The lid turns with a gritty scrape, and at first you think the light is playing tricks on you. Then you notice it. A soft haze lifting from the jar, a pale green shimmer rising like moonlight that got lost and ended up in your toothpaste. You blink, then lean closer, half expecting it to whisper secrets. Your toothbrush waits beside the faucet, innocent and wooden, a tool wholly unprepared for glowing paste. You dip it in without thinking, because this is the era when science feels like a parade of miracles. People trust anything that sparkles and comes in a tin with a neat label. As the bristles sink into the pale substance, the glow deepens, gathering along the handle as if trying to travel up your arm. You pause for a moment and wonder if cleanliness is supposed to radiate this much confidence. The advertisement in last week's newspaper promised vitality and vigor, not illumination. You lift the brush to your mouth, the faint light reflecting off the mirror behind you, turning your reflection into something that looks slightly enchanted and slightly suspicious. When the paste touches your teeth, it fizzes faintly, a soft crackling sound that feels more appropriate in a laboratory than a bathroom. The minty scent is there, but beneath it sits something unfamiliar, like metal mixed with optimism. You scrub as instructed, making small circles the way the pamphlet recommended, though the pamphlet didn't mention that your mouth would glow like a secret lighthouse. The bathroom fills with a gentle shimmer as the paste continues its enthusiastic performance. You notice the way the light clings to your lips, settling into the creases like it is trying to set up permanent residence. You lean over the sink and spit, watching the glowing mixture swirl down the drain, leaving behind a faint trail that lingers longer than you expect. Part of you wonders if it is healthy for plumbing to sparkle like that. Another part of you decides that progress probably looks strange at first. You rinse with cold water, feeling the cool shock against your teeth. When you lower your hands and glance at the mirror, your smile has a faint radiance that wasn't there before. It is subtle, but noticeable enough that you tilt your head and admire it. There is a thrill to it, a sense that you are participating in something futuristic. Everyone in town is talking about this new radium marvel. Mothers speak of stronger enamel, fathers nod approvingly and mutter words like modern. Children brag about whose toothbrush glows the brightest, entirely unaware that toothpaste has crossed into the territory of gentle sorcery. You think back to the salesman who came through last month, standing in the town square with a folding table and a grin wide enough to sell anything. He held up a jar just like the one in your hand, calling it the next step in American advancement. He tapped the glass with pride, claiming it was endorsed by experts. When pressed for names, he coughed politely and changed the subject to whitening power. The crowd nodded anyway. Progress moved, quickly, and no one wanted to be left behind, especially when left behind meant dull teeth. You tidy the countertop, placing the jar beside the brush as though arranging two actors waiting for their next performance. The glow still spills faintly through the glass, tinting the nearby wall with a soft green blush. It is calming in a strange way, soothing like a nightlight that never asked permission. You imagine households across the country doing the same thing right now, brushing their way into science's newest promise. Every sink glowing, every family believing they are stepping confidently into the future. You exhale and step back, the bathroom settling into a gentler light as the lamp continues to flicker. Your teeth feel smooth, your smile feels brighter, the jar gleams with quiet pride, as though it is certain it has improved your life. You reach to close the medicine cabinet, and for a moment you catch your reflection again, your faintly glowing grin, looking both reassuring and slightly too cheerful. It feels like standing on the edge of something important, something modern, something not entirely understood. You turn off the lamp and walk into the hallway, leaving behind a bathroom that still pulses with that subtle green shimmer like it is breathing softly in the dark. You meet the salesman on a bright afternoon when the sidewalks buzz with gossip and the air smells faintly of chimney smoke and optimism. They arrive in a polished wagon painted with cheerful colors, the kind of wagon that promises wonder before you even see what it carries. A small crowd gathers as they hop down, hats tipped at charming angles, suits pressed so sharply they could slice bread. Their shoes shine with almost theatrical enthusiasm, as though even their footwear has been trained to sell something. You walk closer, drawn by curiosity and the unmistakable confidence radiating from men who speak in polished phrases rehearsed in boarding house mirrors. They set up their folding table with practiced ease, producing jars of glowing tooth powder like magicians, unveiling a new trick. Each jar hums faintly in the sunlight, a soft green shimmer that makes the crowd lean closer despite a few nervous chuckles. The salesmen hold the jars aloft, as though presenting sacred relics, their voices ringing across the square with the cadence of traveling prophets. They speak of vitality, energy, and the kind of health that promises to make your mornings sharper and your smiles nearly immortal. Their words flow like syrup, smooth and sweet, and you notice that each salesman's smile is glaringly bright, a little too polished, a little too proud. It occurs to you, that enthusiasm is not a substitute for expertise. Yet these men wield it as if it were a diploma. You listen as they demonstrate the product, dipping toothbrushes into the glowing powder and brushing vigorously in front of the captivated crowd. The bristles catch the light with a shimmering halo that sends whispers rippling through the onlookers. You half expect one of the brushes to start humming a tune. A salesman points directly at you with an expression that suggests you have been chosen by destiny to participate. You step forward, and suddenly you are holding a brush that feels heavier than it should, as though carrying a small, glowing responsibility. The salesman closest to you leans in with a smile that could illuminate a cellar. He speaks of modernity, progress, and the need to embrace the future before it speeds ahead without you. He talks about American ingenuity, with the enthusiasm of a man who has never met a laboratory but trusts that science is always correct, especially when it sparkles. The crowd nods, awed by the conviction in his voice. His colleague chimes in, declaring that every stroke of this miraculous powder strengthens the body, clears the promised mind, and brings you closer to the kind of radiant vitality that advertisements dream about. It is hard not to be swept up by their certainty. You try the powder as instructed, dipping the brush and lifting it to your teeth. The glow intensifies, catching on your lips and knuckles, making your reflection in the nearby window look like it stepped out of a lantern. The crowd murmurs approvingly, impressed by your bravery, or perhaps by the novelty of the moment. The salesmen clap politely, proud of the demonstration as though they invented the concept of teeth themselves. They talk faster, now, sensing the shift in the audience. You can almost see the coins in their minds stacking neatly into profit. They hand out pamphlets decorated with drawings of smiling families whose teeth shine like enchanted pearls. The text promises improved energy, stronger enamel, and a future where brushing feels like participating in the nation's scientific rise. They insist that the glow is proof of its power, a visual assurance that something extraordinary is happening inside your mouth. When someone asks whether glowing powder should be swallowed, the salesmen laugh warmly, as though the question itself is provincial. They assure the crowd that everything modern shines a little, then move on before anyone can think too deeply about it. You watch as jars are purchased eagerly, coins exchanged with the excitement usually reserved for carnival treats. The salesmen pack up their table once the crowd thins, tipping their hats again before climbing into their wagon. It rolls away with a triumphant rattle, leaving behind families clutching glowing jars and neighbors buzzing about progress. You stand in the square a little longer, feeling the lingering sparkle on your teeth. The crowd disperses, the afternoon settles, and the soft hum of the powder still echoes faintly in your ears. It is a peculiar feeling to trust men whose confidence outshines their caution. Yet this is an age where brightness feels like proof and persuasion moves faster than understanding. You learn about radium the same way most people in the early 20th century do, through the collective gasp of a nation discovering something that glows without asking permission. It appears in newspapers, first, tucked between optimistic headlines about inventions that promise to simplify life and advertisements for hair tonics that smell like turpentine and hope. Editors call it the element of the future, a substance so full of energy it refuses to sit quietly in the dark. Scientists speak of it with reverence, their voices trembling slightly, as though addressing a temperamental deity. Its glow becomes a symbol of progress, as if the country has finally found a shortcut to enlightenment, conveniently packaged for daily use. You sit on your front porch and watch neighbors discuss it with the same enthusiasm usually reserved for parades. They whisper that radium heals, energizes, and possibly bestows a hint of immortality if used in the right dosage, whatever that dosage may be. No one seems bothered by the ambiguity. Modernity often arrives wrapped in uncertainty, and people in this era have mastered the art of trusting miracles before asking questions. Housewives nod eagerly as they imagine cleaner homes. Fathers fantasize about renewed vitality. Children simply want something that glows, because glowing objects outrank sensible ones by a wide margin. When the evening paper arrives, you read stories about laboratories filled with glass tubes and careful men in crisp coats. They hold radium like treasure hunters presenting a newly discovered gem. Their descriptions blur the boundary between science and mythology. They speak of radiant emanations and invisible forces that enhance the human body, as though they have stumbled upon the secret ingredient missing from every toothpaste, tonic, and soap. You picture them working late into the night, faces illuminated by soft green light, convinced they are sculpting the future. In their defense, the glow makes everything look important. Advertisements join the chorus. They appear on billboards, in magazines, and on the backs of cereal boxes. Each one promises transformation. The jars look respectable, their labels printed in elegant fonts with borders that imply medical approval even when none exists. The packaging speaks of infused vitality and energetic cleansing. It never mentions anything unpleasant, because unpleasantness does not sell. Instead, it highlights the shimmering radiance inside each jar, inviting customers to imagine their bodies absorbing a little piece of the stars. You find yourself tempted, because it is difficult to resist something that shines like bottled moonlight and claims to improve your life. You attend a town meeting where the local doctor explains radium with the calm certainty of a man who once read a pamphlet and has since promoted himself to expert. He gestures toward diagrams on a chalkboard and uses phrases like invigorating particles and restorative essence. His explanations are vague enough to worry a future generation, but inspiring enough to convince the current one. People lean forward in their chairs, absorbing every word like students at the dawn of a new age. The doctor concludes by placing a jar of radiant tonic on the table, its glow spreading across the wood like a small sunrise. No one questions it. You begin to understand how a substance can enchant an entire society. It is not simply the glow itself, though that certainly helps. It is the promise behind it. Radium offers a shortcut to modernity. It tells people that the future, once distant and complex, can now be purchased at the pharmacy for a few coins. It reassures them that science is trustworthy, progress is inevitable, and anything luminous must be beneficial. In a time when electricity is still a novelty and automobiles rattle like metal beasts, radium feels like proof that the world is speeding towards something extraordinary. You walk home under the pale light of the moon, thinking about how quickly enthusiasm spreads. A neighbor waves from her porch, proudly displaying a jar of radium face cream. Another calls out that the local bakery is experimenting with radium-enriched bread because nothing says innovation like luminescent pastries. You laugh softly, uncertain whether the nation is preparing to leap forward or simply dazzled by the nearest shiny object. As you turn onto your street, you realize that the glow has woven itself into the fabric of everyday life. People trust it because it looks like progress. They hold it because it promises more. And you, standing there in the quiet night, begin to understand how a glowing element manages to capture the imagination of a country eager to shine, even if it never stops to ask why. You watch the factories rise like monuments to progress, tall brick buildings with windows that glow faintly even in daylight, as though the walls themselves have swallowed too much ambition. Inside, the air hums with machinery that clatters, whirs, and complains in metallic rhythms. The workers move through the wide rooms in steady lines, uniforms smudged with the same soft green haze that coats everything within reach. They look proud, purposeful, part of a nation convinced it has mastered the future. You step inside and feel the warmth of the place, not just from the boilers, but from the quiet excitement that everyone carries like an invisible badge. The assembly line stretches across the floor like a gleaming spine, each station dedicated to a single task. One worker scoops glowing powder from a barrel, another mixes it with fragrant oils, and a third fills slender tubes with the mixture. The tubes sparkle as they move along the conveyor, forming a moving river of radiance that bends and reflects against the walls. Supervisors stroll by with clipboards pressed to their chests, nodding approvingly at the efficiency. They speak in brisk tones about quotas and innovation, entirely pleased that their workplace feels like a combination of scientific laboratory and gentle carnival attraction. You notice the workers' hands first. Their fingertips shimmer faintly, the glow clinging to them like dust from a dream. They laugh about it, holding their hands up to compare brightness, joking about becoming walking lanterns. Some smear the glow playfully onto their sleeves or cheeks, delighted by the spectacle. No one seems troubled, because the glow feels harmless in a world where every new invention promises to make life easier. The idea that something beautiful might be dangerous has not yet found its way into these halls. Instead, the workers treat the radiance like a badge of honor, proof that they are part of something cutting edge. You move closer to a packing station where women place finished tubes into small cardboard, boxes decorated with elegant lettering. The boxes boast claims of vitality and brilliance, adorned with swirling fonts that make every sentence look official even when it contains more enthusiasm than accuracy. The women chat about weekend plans, family recipes, and the possibility that the tubes might soon be shipped overseas. They swipe the glowing dust from their aprons with casual flicks, unaware that it stains their skin with a shimmer that refuses to wash away. The faint light follows every movement of their fingers, turning the simplest gesture into a performance. At lunch, the workers gather in the break room, their sandwiches wrapped in paper that now shines where their hands have touched it. They laugh when someone points it out, amused by the idea of glowing lunches. A man at the corner table jokes that he will never need a lantern again. His friends applaud the remark, not because it is clever, but because it matches the cheerful blindness that fills the room. Everyone has accepted that the glow is a sign of progress, not a warning. Questioning it would feel almost unpatriotic, like doubting the future itself. You walk through another part of the factory, where the barrels of raw radium compound sit stacked, like oversized jars of enchanted flour. Workers scoop the powder with metal ladles, tipping it into mixers that churn loudly, sending tiny sparks of light drifting into the air. The sparks settle on hair, clothing, and the floorboards, forming constellations that shift with every footstep. The scene feels otherworldly, almost magical, and you understand why people trust it. Magic is easier to embrace than uncertainty. Beauty is easier to celebrate than caution. A foreman approaches you, his smile broad and confident, his eyes reflecting the green glow that fills the room. He speaks proudly about production numbers, the rising demand, and the company's plans to expand. He gestures at the glowing tubes with the pride of a man presenting treasure, convinced that his factory is building more than products. He believes they are, building a healthier, stronger nation. When you ask whether anyone worries about the glow clinging to their skin, he laughs lightly and waves the concern away, insisting that modern science knows what it is doing. The glow is simply proof of quality, he says. Nothing more. You watch the tubes move toward the loading dock, where crates are nailed shut and stamped with destinations across the country. Workers slide the crates into wagons that wait outside, the afternoon sun catching the faint shimmer still clinging to the wood. Drivers glance back at the cargo as though they are hauling bottled moonlight, unaware that their hands now glow too. As the wagons roll away, you stand in the doorway, watching the factory floor pulse gently with its strange radiance. The workers continue with their tasks, humming, laughing, and wiping glowing dust from their brows, utterly unaware that their fingertips shine for reasons the world has not yet learned to fear. You feel the public delight most clearly on the evenings when families gather in their kitchens, brushing their teeth with the enthusiasm of soldiers preparing for a parade. The glow spills across every countertop, reflecting in the aluminum tea kettles and glass jars of sugar. Children stand on stools with wide eyes, waving their glowing toothbrushes around like tiny wands. Their parents laugh and call out warnings not to fling toothpaste at the wallpaper again, though everyone secretly enjoys the spectacle. The whole ritual feels less like hygiene and more like participating in a national ceremony dedicated to progress, the kind where science promises to escort you straight into a shimmering tomorrow. You visit neighbors who invite you inside to marvel at their new toothpaste, proudly displayed like a trophy on the kitchen shelf. They twist open the lid and lean close, whispering in reverent tones about the faint humming they swear they can hear from the jar. They grin broadly when they catch their reflections in the mirror, delighted by the pale glow that outlines their teeth. One father insists his smile seems stronger, more confident somehow, as if the glow itself has granted him authority. His wife nods approvingly, saying it feels like brushing with bottled energy. The idea that toothpaste could double as a lantern is not concerning to anyone. It is thrilling. In the barbershop, men debate which brand shines most brightly, tapping their fingers on the counter in rhythm with their exaggerated claims. They talk about enamel strength and invigorated gums, while the barber trims their hair with the care of a man who has heard these conversations all week. He adds his own opinion, occasionally claiming the glow shows that the product is working deeply, like a miner searching for gold inside the mouth. Everyone nods in agreement, pleased to be part of a trend that makes them feel modern. The radio in the corner hums softly, its broadcast occasionally interrupted by commercials praising the extraordinary sparkle of scientifically enhanced toothpaste. You walk past classrooms where teachers remind children to brush properly, placing cheerful posters on the walls that depict smiling cartoon families, all shining softly as though lit from within. The children giggle as the teacher explains that good hygiene leads to good health, and good health now glows. They repeat it together like a tiny chorus, proud to be students in an age where even cleanliness performs tricks. On the playground, they compare whose toothbrush glows brightest, claiming it proves whose family cares most about the future. In the general store, shelves of ordinary products seem dull next to the sparkling toothpaste shipments that always sell first. Customers talk excitedly as they reach for the jars, convinced that they are buying not just a product but a small piece of scientific marvel. They share tips on how to store it, how to keep the glow strong, and how to encourage reluctant relatives to try it. The store clerk smiles each time someone purchases a jar, claiming business has never been better. He jokes that soon even the apples will need to glow to keep up. Shoppers laugh, unaware of how quickly they have accepted radiance as the new standard. You walk home at dusk, passing windows where families lean over sinks, brushing with synchronized determination. The houses shimmer faintly from within, as though each one holds a glowing hearth dedicated to oral health. It creates a strange beauty, rows of homes lit not just by lamps, but by smiles that flicker gently with promise. The town feels alive, transformed by a trend that everyone believes heralds a brighter era. You pause beneath a street lamp and listen to the faint echoes of laughter drifting from open windows. There is a warmth to it, a shared conviction that the country has stepped into something wonderful. People trust the glow because it makes them feel connected to progress, as if each brushstroke carries them a little closer to the future they have been promised. They believe they are brushing toward something radiant, something grand, something just beginning to take shape. And for now, that belief is enough to make the whole nation shine. You explore the strange optimism of the era on a morning when the sunlight spills across town with the same warm confidence everyone seems to carry lately. People step out of their homes dressed in their best coats, breathing the crisp air like it contains more promise than oxygen. The newspapers on porches rustle in the breeze, their headlines declaring new marvels of science with a kind of breathless excitement, usually reserved for miracles. You read phrases like boundless potential and radiant discoveries, and it occurs to you that modernity has become something of a competitive sport. Everyone wants to believe they are living at the very front edge of human advancement, even if that advancement occasionally hums in the dark. Down the street, you pass a hardware store displaying a glowing lamp in the window. The lamp is not actually plugged in, yet it emits a faint shimmer that attracts a small crowd. The store owner stands proudly behind the glass, arms crossed, nodding with satisfaction at the fascinated customers. He claims it showcases the future of household lighting, though he admits he does not entirely understand how it works. He does not need to. In these days, sparkle is a kind of currency, and anything that glows is assumed to be brilliant, both figuratively and literally. At the local diner, you slide into a booth and overhear conversations drifting from nearby tables. Patrons discuss inventions as though they are sharing secrets about hidden treasure. A man at the counter talks excitedly about a watch he purchased that glows faintly at night, calling it proof that time itself is becoming more civilized. A woman claims she has started using a face cream containing a minute hint of something radiant, insisting her skin feels livelier, though she cannot say what lively means in this context. People nod eagerly at each story, because skepticism feels outdated, like using a horse when someone offers you an automobile. You sip your coffee and watch as a delivery boy enters carrying crates marked with elegant lettering. The boxes promise vitality, energy, and scientific improvement. He sets them near the shelves, and the customers look at them with the same reverence they might give sacred relics. The diner owner explains that the city is filled with new products, boasting modern formulas, each one brighter and more impressive than the last. According to him, the world is moving so quickly that if something does not glow, people assume it belongs to the past. When you step outside, the afternoon sun reflects off storefronts and carriage windows, creating flashes of light that seem to echo the popular mood. Everything sparkles a little more these days, whether intentionally or not. You walk through the market square, where street vendors arrange their goods with exaggerated care. One sells pillows stuffed with a material he claims is scientifically enhanced to improve sleep. Another offers bottled tonics labeled with phrases like invigorating particles and natural radiance, though the contents look suspiciously like ordinary water tinted with enthusiasm. Buyers gather eagerly, convinced that anything connected to progress, even loosely, must hold value. You pause near a man demonstrating a small device designed to glow when held. He lifts it proudly, showing how it pulses faintly in his palm. The crowd reacts with delight, as though witnessing a glimpse of tomorrow. When someone asks what it does, the man smiles and says that is the beauty of it, because the future often begins before anyone fully understands it. The sentiment earns applause. It is an era that favors wonder over caution, spectacle over scrutiny, and a good story over a long explanation. As evening settles, you stroll past homes where windows shine warmly, revealing families enjoying their nightly routines. You see children waving glowing toys, parents applying creams that shimmer faintly in lamplight, and neighbors comparing radiant products like trophies. There is no sense of alarm, only pride, as though the glow itself is a badge of modern citizenship. People firmly believe that progress must sparkle to be real, and if something dazzles the eye, it feels too clever to be questioned. You pause on the sidewalk and take in the scene, the soft illumination drifting across porches and rooftops. It is beautiful in a gentle, almost innocent way. The nation is convinced it is stepping boldly into a shining age, one glowing jar at a time. You stand in the middle of it all, watching the optimism spread through the town, like light across water, bright enough to hide the shadows gathering quietly at the edges. You explore the strange optimism of the era on a day when nearly everything seems to shimmer, even things that have no business doing so. The air buzzes with the confidence of a nation waking up each morning, convinced it is marching into a glorious future. People walk down the streets with a spring in their step, glancing into store windows where products glow softly under the lamps, as though radiance itself has become the default setting for modern life. You pass a group of neighbors discussing the latest inventions, and their voices carry the kind of excitement usually reserved for circus arrivals or surprise holidays. Progress, they insist, is finally within reach, and it apparently sparkles to announce its presence. In the pharmacy, shelves gleam with jars and tubes that promise vitality, clarity, and general improvements to the human condition. You pick up a small container labeled with elegant script, claiming to deliver a sense of restoration through scientifically infused brilliance. It glows faintly in your hand, and the pharmacist nods proudly, as though he personally extracted the radiance himself. He talks about the marvels of the age, how every month brings another discovery, and how embracing these glowing products is a sign of intelligence and civic pride. You look around and see customers studying items with awe, their eyes wide as children at a magic show. Outside, you wander past a hardware store where the owner has set up a display of new lamps. Some glow gently without being plugged in, pulsing like they have a heartbeat of their own. He explains to a curious crowd that these are examples of enhanced lighting solutions, the future of domestic comfort. Never mind that no one can say precisely why they shine. What matters is the effect. The crowd murmurs approvingly, admiring the ethereal glow as if it proves the world is improving by the minute. At a cafe near the town square, you take a seat by the window and listen to patrons boast about their personal upgrades. One man announces that he has started using a shaving cream with a faint luminescence, claiming it makes him feel energized in the mornings. A woman proudly shares that she bought a new face powder that sparkles ever so slightly, insisting it provides a healthy glow that nature alone cannot deliver. The whole room nods along, convinced that the future is not only brighter, but gently radiant. You sip your drink and wonder when exactly luminosity became synonymous with credibility. Strolling through the market, you watch vendors decorate their stalls with products designed to catch the eye. There are glowing soaps, radiant tonics, and even small trinkets that hum softly when touched. The customers flock to anything that emits a hint of light, drawn like moths to lanterns. Vendors emphasize words like advanced and scientific with the same conviction a preacher might use for sacred texts. The customers lap it up, eager to purchase whatever seems most futuristic, even if they do not entirely understand what makes it so. In the evening, you walk through a neighborhood where every house seems to shine a little from within. Families gather at their sinks, brushing their teeth with glowing toothpaste that casts a soft halo around their faces. Through open windows, you hear parents praising the benefits of modern cleanliness and children giggling as they compare the brightness of their smiles. The glow reflects off walls, mirrors, and even the polished brass door handles, giving the entire street an otherworldly charm. It feels like stepping into a place where the ordinary rules no longer apply, where the glow itself is a kind of silent invitation to believe. You pause at the edge of the street and take in the sight of the community welcoming this new era with open arms. There is a warmth to it, a collective enthusiasm that makes the world feel lighter. People believe wholeheartedly that progress must sparkle to be real, that anything worth trusting should shine visibly. They look at radiance and see proof of advancement, not a mystery begging to be questioned. For now, the glow comforts them, wrapping the town in a bright, hopeful illusion of a future that seems impossible to doubt. Even in the deepening dusk, the shimmer lingers, settling over streets and rooftops like a promise. You meet the early scientists in echoing lecture halls and cramped laboratories that smell faintly of chalk dust, boiled linen, and ambition. They greet you with the confident smiles of men who have spent long nights staring at glowing vials and have decided, without hesitation, that the universe is finally cooperating with them. Their white coats are spotless, their hair slightly disheveled from intellectual struggle, and their eyes gleam with the satisfaction of people who believe they are standing at the frontier of brilliance. They speak quickly, as if afraid the glow in their glass tubes might vanish if they pause long enough to think too deeply. One scientist ushers you toward a demonstration table cluttered with beakers containing pale green light. He taps a vial gently with the back of a pen and says it contains proof of humanity's next great leap. You ask what exactly the glow represents, and he launches into an enthusiastic explanation filled with elaborate terminology that loops in circles like a parade, trying to find its way back to the main street. His voice rises with every phrase, confidence swelling as the details grow less clear. He gestures toward a chalkboard full of diagrams, arrows pointing in all directions, and a handful of equations that seem decorative rather than functional. He assures you it all makes perfect sense, provided you do not look too closely at the arithmetic. Another scientist stands by a table of instruments that click softly, measuring something he calls energetic vitality. When you ask how the device works, he smiles in a way that suggests the question itself is charmingly unnecessary. He flips a switch, and the machine buzzes with purpose, lights flickering theatrically. He explains that radium contains a natural vigor that can benefit the body in ways too complex for the public to understand, but too important to ignore. His tone implies that doubt is a quaint habit belonging to previous generations. Modern people, he says, must learn to trust what they cannot fully explain. In the corner, a pair of researchers debate how best to promote the benefits of radium to the public. speaking as though they are planning a benevolent campaign rather than improvising as they go. One insists they emphasize its natural origin, claiming anything born of the earth must be inherently wholesome. His colleague argues for the opposite, saying the public wants progress, not nature, and that the glow alone will win them over. They settle on a mixture of both approaches, confident that no one will question the contradiction. Their certainty feels like a performance, polished and practiced, but it carries the charm of people who want to believe they are doing good. You follow one of them into a small, adjoining room where a collection of early medical pamphlets is spread across a desk. The covers show elegant illustrations of smiling figures, all depicted with an inner radiance that borders on supernatural. He tells you proudly that these pamphlets are designed to reassure the public. He admits, with a wink, that some of the claims are still being tested. Tested, in this case, seems to mean someone has thought about them very hard and decided they sound plausible. He folds his hands behind his back, chest puffed out, and confirms with unwavering certainty that radium strengthens the body, sharpens the mind, and cleanses the spirit. The spirit part appears nowhere in the research notes, but it sounds impressive enough that he cannot resist including it. In a more cluttered lab, a senior scientist sits hunched over a notebook, filled with sketches of glowing particles drifting elegantly through imagined human organs. He explains that the glow represents inherent life force, tapping the page with the authority of a man who has convinced himself this description should go unchallenged. You ask whether there are long-term studies. He waves the question away as if brushing dust from a windowsill, insisting that progress cannot wait for the slow pacing of caution. His breath forms small clouds in the chilly room, and the green glow from nearby beakers casts unusual shadows across his face, making him look both wise and vaguely spectral. Everywhere you turn, the scientists speak with the confidence of people who know the world is listening closely. Their guesses come wrapped in polished language, delivered with a tone that discourages doubt. They believe that if they speak brightly enough, the future will follow suit. And as you walk out of the laboratory into the bustling street, you realize the nation trusts them, not because their explanations are airtight, but because their assurance glows almost as brightly as the substance they defend. You wander through a department store that feels more like a lantern festival than a place to buy sensible items. Every counter glimmers with the same soft shimmer, each product bathed in a faint green haze, as if the shelves themselves are breathing moonlight. Saleswomen in crisp uniforms move like practiced dancers, waving jars and tins that sparkle in their hands. They smile with the slightly frantic enthusiasm of people who have decided that progress should smell faintly of lavender and faintly of the periodic table. One counter offers Radium beauty cream packaged in elegant jars with golden lettering. The saleswoman leans in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, as though revealing the secret to eternal youth. She dabs the shimmering cream on the back of your hand and encourages you to watch the glow spread, insisting that the radiance represents vitality seeping into your skin. You are not entirely convinced that vitality should feel warm and slightly tingly, but her confidence sweeps over you like a gentle tide. She demonstrates the product again, smoothing it across her own cheek with the grace of someone who believes wholeheartedly in luminous complexions and mildly hazardous science. Across the aisle, a man in a vest stands behind a display of radium tonics, each bottle filled with liquid brilliance. He lifts one gently, letting the light dance through the glass. He promises that a sip each morning will flush your system of fatigue and flood your body with energy. He uses words like invigorate and prime harmonize, which seem designed to reassure rather than inform. He speaks quickly, like a man trying to outrun questions. He assures you that modern living demands modern solutions, and that any discomfort you feel is simply your body adjusting to greatness. Toward the back of the store, you find the Radium chewing gum. The packaging features smiling children, all with gleaming teeth, and a suspiciously healthy glow. The salesman, a lanky figure with a sales pitch that feels more like a sermon, insists the gum strengthens the jaw, brightens the smile, and might even improve posture. He snaps a piece in half to show off its faint luminescence, as though the ability to glow slightly in the dark is a sign of nutritional superiority. He tells you that children love it, which is both comforting and unsettling, especially when he adds that the gum leaves a pleasant metallic aftertaste most customers eventually enjoy. You step outside into the bustling street, where advertisements line the buildings. Posters depict glamorous women applying glowing powder to their faces, athletes drinking radiant tonics, and children brushing their teeth with toothpaste that shines like fireflies. The imagery is hypnotic. Every figure looks vibrant and unburdened, as though coated in health itself rather than a substance that hums faintly under certain conditions. Street vendors hand out samples, their trays sparkling like treasure chests under the afternoon sun. Passers-by accept them eagerly, laughing as they inspect the shimmering gifts, their curiosity outweighing their questions. You wander into a small apothecary, where the shelves hold an even more eclectic assortment of radium-infused wonders. There is radium soap for purifying the complexion, radium bath salts for soothing nerves, and radium hair tonic for strengthening roots and improving shine. The apothecary himself, a man with spectacles perched precariously on the end of his nose, insists that nature has finally delivered a substance capable of restoring balance to the modern body. He speaks of purity, of cosmic energy, of the invisible forces now made visible by science. His gestures sweep gracefully through the air, brushing past jars that glow faintly in their rows. On your way out, you pass a group of teenagers crowded around a storefront window. They marvel at a new advertisement for radium lipstick, arguing animatedly about which shade will glow the brightest during evening dances. Their excitement radiates through the group, carried not by facts or caution, but by the thrill of owning something that feels pulled from the future rather than the earth. They speak of transformation, of standing out, of glittering under soft lights and catching the eye of anyone nearby. As you continue down the street, you realize that radium culture has woven itself into every corner of daily life. It is in the creams, the soaps, the tonics, the gum, and the powders, each promising a better version of the self, illuminated from within. There is something charming about the optimism, a collective belief that progress should be visible. Shimmering faintly in the dark, people chase that glow with open hearts and eager hands, trusting that anything so radiant must surely be good. And for now, the nation shines along with it, basking in a light it does not yet understand. You step through the doorway into a modest early-century home where the scent of warm oatmeal and soap hangs gently in the air. The kitchen is bright with morning sunlight, but the real glow comes from upstairs, where you hear children laughing with the unrestrained delight of those who still believe the world is mostly magic. When you follow their voices, you find them gathered around a small porcelain sink, tiny feet tapping excitedly on the floorboards as they brush their teeth with the enthusiasm usually reserved for birthday cakes and circus posters. Their toothbrushes shimmer faintly, each bristle tipped with the same pale radiance as the jars stacked in department store windows. The children wave the brushes like wands, pretending to cast spells, their voices echoing down the hallway in high-pitched triumph. They take turns blowing glowing bubbles into the air, admiring the way they drift lazily before popping with a soft sound. The older sister claims her toothpaste makes her immune to bad dreams. The younger brother insists his gives him super strength. Their mother, standing nearby with a towel in her hands, smiles at their games, pleased that the morning routine has become something joyful instead of the usual chore. She watches them with a warmth that only parents know, certain she is giving them the latest science-approved advantage in life. Downstairs, Their father adjusts his tie while reading a newspaper editorial praising the brilliance of radium hygiene. He nods along with the article, rubbing his jaw thoughtfully, imagining a future where everyone glows a little, where health is visible, where modern conveniences transform everyday living into something almost heavenly. He is a practical man, but even he has been swayed by the promise of progress that sparkles softly in familiar packaging. When he hears the laughter above, he smiles without looking up from the page, assuming his children are brushing their way toward strong futures and cleaner consciences. Back, upstairs, the children lean closer to the mirror to watch their own reflections shine. They believe this glow marks them as special, as though the universe has whispered a secret blessing into their toothpaste tubes. They argue for a moment over whose toothbrush glows brightest, each convinced that their particular spark holds some kind of advantage. Their mother steps in with the gentle diplomacy of a small kingdom's ruler, assuring each child that their glow is perfect, unique, and healthy. She speaks with soft certainty, echoing the words she heard from advertisements and department clerks, trusting them because they sounded confident and wore neatly pressed suits. When the children finish brushing, they rinse their mouths, and beams of faint light swirl down the drain. The youngest giggles when he notices his fingertips shimmer under the window's glow, convinced he has discovered a new talent. His mother wipes his hands tenderly, amused and only mildly perplexed when her own palms catch the same gentle radiance. She tells him that modern products work wonders, and he accepts the explanation with complete trust, nodding solemnly as though he has been given a scientific truth worthy of a chalkboard lecture. In the bedroom, their grandmother sits by her sewing basket, unaware that her quilt reflects just slightly more than the morning sun would naturally allow. She watches the children roll across the floor, their clothes gathering tiny specks of glow from spilled powder on the dresser. She remembers simpler remedies from her youth, but she has grown fond of the new era's conveniences, especially the ones that promise long life and good health with such enthusiasm. She assumes the sparkle is harmless and perhaps even beneficial, something that signals renewal rather than risk. When the family gathers at the table for breakfast, the children's smiles shine faintly, though no one seems to notice. They chatter about school, friends, and plans for the afternoon, their voices cheerful and full of promise. Their parents glance proudly at them, reassured that they are doing everything right, following the latest advice from experts and trusted companies. They believe they are giving their children the brightest start possible, the kind advertised in glossy magazines and praised in news columns. They bask in a sense of comfort that progress has made life gentler, healthier, and more luminous. As the family continues their day, the glow persists in small, quiet ways, unnoticed and unexamined, woven gently into the rhythm of their lives. The light feels like progress, like the future arriving early, and no one questions it, because questioning would mean stepping outside the warm certainty that they are moving forward with the rest of the country. In that little house, surrounded by laughter and soft radiance, the world seems perfectly safe, perfectly modern, and perfectly bright. You wander through a city street, where billboards stretch across brick walls like bright, boastful murals of the future. Everywhere you look, there is radiance. Posters shimmer with soft green highlights, the ink catching the light in a way that seems almost alive. You pause at one advertisement showing a smiling woman with perfect curls, holding a glowing toothbrush like a scepter. Her grin could power a small lighthouse. The caption beneath her declares that her secret is purity, as if cleanliness now comes with its own halo. She looks triumphant, luminous, and possibly unaware that teeth should never resemble celestial objects. In shop windows, mannequins display radium-infused beauty kits arranged like treasures from a world where health must sparkle to be believed. Each jar glows faintly, creating the illusion of magic bottled and waiting to be purchased. The displays are arranged with dramatic flair, casting a soft radiance across the sidewalk. People stop frequently, hypnotized by the gentle pulse of the products. They lean closer, drawn by the promise of eternal youth delivered through a substance that hums quietly like a lullaby from a distant star. Inside the pharmacy, a glossy pamphlet rests on the counter. Its pages are filled with illustrations of rosy-cheeked women dipping delicate brushes into glowing powders. The artists did not hold back on the radiance. Each woman appears to be illuminated from within, as though enlightenment now comes printed in pastel hues. The copy, beneath the images, reads with unwavering confidence, insisting that modern life demands modern methods. A little radiance, it claims, is the key to feeling fresh and vibrant. The pamphlet carries the tone of someone who has never once doubted themselves, even while guessing. Further down the aisle, you pick up a small box, advertising a radium soap that promises to cleanse not only the skin, but the spirit. The packaging features a serene figure bathing in a pool of shimmering water, surrounded by swirling light that looks suspiciously theatrical. The soap boasts that it washes away fatigue, dullness, and anything else inconveniently human. You imagine the designers sketching the image with wide eyes, convinced they are capturing the peak of scientific achievement rather than accidentally creating something that resembles a holy relic for bath enthusiasts. Stepping outside again, you notice a billboard towering above the street. It displays a man with gleaming hair, combing through it confidently while the background radiates like a sunrise. The advertisement proudly claims that Radium Hair Tonic invigorates follicles and grants strength, shine, and the vague promise of a better life. The man's pose is heroic, as if glowing hair might reshape destiny. People pass beneath the billboard, gazing upward with a sense of wonder, as though witnessing the dawn of an age where grooming products might someday replace ambition. Nearby, a vendor distributes free samples of a radium-infused face powder. The small tins sparkle under the daylight, their labels decorated with stars and delicate swirls, suggesting cosmic approval. Women gather around the vendor, listening eagerly to his pitch. He speaks with serene certainty, explaining that the powder brings a natural or healthy glow. He does not specify what natural means in this context, and no one asks. Instead, they dab small amounts onto the backs of their hands, giggling softly as the shimmer appears. The vendor beams at them as though he has just performed a minor miracle. You pass a cinema where a short film is advertised at the entrance. The poster shows glamorous actors applying radium products backstage, each one glowing gently beneath the makeup lights. The tagline promises that radiance is the mark of modern sophistication. You imagine an audience seated inside, watching the film with entranced expressions. They whisper to one another, marveling at the idea that beauty should shine, that health should twinkle, that progress must be visible to be believed. The film likely features soft music and wide smiles, comforting the viewers with reassuring messages draped in luminous air. As you move down the street, it becomes clear that the advertisements do more than sell products. They sell a vision of the future wrapped in shimmer and certainty, a world where glow equals goodness, where radiance equals respectability. These messages weave themselves into the thoughts of anyone who walks past them. The glow becomes a symbol of hope, a promise that the modern age will be brighter, safer, and more beautiful than the dim years behind it. And so the nation embraces the shimmer without hesitation, trusting that anything which glows must be guiding them forward. You wander into a traveling medicine show that has pinned itself to the edge of a small-town fairground, the kind of place where tents ripple in the breeze like eager sails, and everything smells faintly of popcorn, horse sweat, and ambition. The crowds gather long before the performance begins, drawn by posters, promising marvels pulled from the cutting edge of science, or at least from the edge of someone's confidence. A wooden stage stands at the center, draped in curtains painted with swirling beams of light, exploding from a bottle labeled with letters so decorative they could double as lace. The salesman arrives in a whirl of showmanship, stepping onto the stage as though he has been personally summoned by destiny. His voice booms across the field with the volume of a preacher and the certainty of a man who has never once questioned his own sales pitch. He lifts a gleaming vial toward the price sky, letting the sunlight strike the liquid inside until it glows with a soft, almost theatrical haze. The crowd gasps, because nothing captures the imagination quite like a substance that behaves as if it belongs in a fairy tale. The salesman smiles, basking in their awe, and introduces the miracle cure that promises relief from fatigue, melancholy, aching joints, slow digestion, weak nerves, and possibly poor manners. He paces dramatically across the stage, moving with the energy of a man who drinks his own product and perhaps more than the recommended amount. He gestures toward his assistant, a young man whose grin is so bright it seems aggressive. The assistant uncorks a bottle and pours a tiny measure into a glass. The salesman claims the tonic realigns the body's inner currents, drawing on the same cosmic forces that light the stars. He speaks of vitality, renewal, and harmony, delivering each word with the reverence of a sacred rite. The audience leans forward, spellbound, because in a world hungry for progress, even half-understood science feels like salvation. When the salesman invites volunteers to the stage, several people surge forward. They sip the tonic, with the solemnity of participants in an ancient ritual, nodding thoughtfully as if searching their bodies for immediate transformations. The salesman narrates their experience before they can speak, declaring their posture improved, their spirits lifted, their pulses invigorated. The volunteers nod along, swept up in the pageantry. One elderly man swears he feels warmth spreading through his chest. The salesman interprets this as evidence of cosmic alignment, rather than the fact that the tonic tastes faintly of pepper and something metallic. Beside the stage, shelves of glowing jars and dine. Bottles shimmer like a treasury plucked from a dragon's cave. Women coo over the radiant creams. Men inspect the tonics with furrowed brows that quickly smooth into acceptance. Children tug eagerly at their parents' sleeves, captivated by the soft radiance dancing inside the glass. The products promise everything except restraint. One jar claims to restore vigor. Another insists it strengthens bones. A third pledges to improve sleep by illuminating the spirit. None of them mention moderation. You listen as the salesman shifts into the grand finale, his voice rising with the confidence of a man who believes he is delivering humanity to a higher plane of existence. He holds up a box of radium tablets and declares them the pinnacle of modern medicine. They sparkle faintly under the light, which he interprets as proof of purity rather than a warning sign. He insists that each tablet contains enough energy to brighten both body and mood, urging the crowd to take charge of their health by swallowing a little starlight each day. The crowd erupts in applause. They surge forward to purchase the shimmering products, their faces alight with hope, excitement, and the thrill, participating in something that feels modern and daring. Coins clatter into the salesman's cash box. Bottles disappear from the shelves in eager hands. People chatter excitedly as they examine their purchases, discussing the ailments they expect to banish and the newfound vigor they anticipate to morning. As you step back from the bustling tent, watching the crowd disperse with their glowing treasures tucked under their arms, you feel the peculiar mixture of charm and unease that fills the air. The show was entertaining, the promises captivating, and the spectacle unforgettable. Yet beneath, the glow and laughter lingers, the quiet question no one asks, the one drowned out by confidence, charisma, and shining glass. The salesman never claimed to cure common sense, and perhaps that was the only promise he kept. You follow the growth of radium tooth powders, the way one might watch a bright idea scatter across a landscape, catching fire in places where no one expected sparks. At first, The jars sit politely on pharmacy shelves, tucked between liniments and tonics, glowing with the quiet confidence of newcomers who know their moment is coming. They attract curious glances from customers who stop mid-errand to marvel at the faint shimmer rising behind the glass. The pharmacist introduces the powders in a tone that suggests they are not merely products, but stepping stones into a better age. People leave the shop clutching the jars like prized discoveries, eager to share the marvel with their neighbors. Soon the powders appear in general stores, their displays stacked in proud pyramids that seem to shine even under dim lamps. Store clerks polish the jars each morning, not because they need it, but because the glow makes the task feel ceremonial. Shoppers gather around the display, whispering about relatives who swear their teeth feel stronger and brighter after only a few days. A school teacher claims she feels more alert in the mornings now that her routine begins with a product that looks as though it could fuel a small lighthouse. The enthusiasm spreads, effortlessly passed from household to household like a cheerful rumor that refuses to fade. You visit homes where the jars have settled into kitchen drawers alongside flour sifters and spice tins. Housewives open the drawers to show them off proudly, explaining how the powder has become part of the family's daily rhythm. They treat the jars with the kind of affectionate familiarity usually reserved for heirloom recipes or clever gadgets that make life smoother. Children peek over the counter, eager to see the glow again, convinced the powder carries a hint of magic. The mothers smile, pleased by the excitement and reassured by the promises printed on the label. Modern products, they say, are designed by clever minds who understand the future far better than ordinary folk. In other homes, the tooth powder occupies a place of honor on the bathroom shelf, casting a soft glow across porcelain sinks and polished faucets. Evening routines become illuminated rituals. Families brush together before bed, their movements synchronized like a small chorus of hopeful participants. The glow reflects in mirrors, mingling with lamplight until every face looks a little brighter, a little more eager to welcome the next day. Fathers boast that the powder strengthens enamel. Mothers nod with the certainty of people who have placed their trust in progress. No one questions it, because questioning feels out of step with the spirit of the age. You notice the powders creeping into travel. Kits and overnight bags, carried proudly on trips to relatives who live miles away. Guests arrive with jars wrapped carefully in cloth, eager to share the marvel with anyone who has not yet tried it. They present the powder with the enthusiasm of travelers returning from distant lands bearing exotic gifts. Hosts react with delight, setting the jars on the table to admire the glow before placing them carefully into drawers. The powders spread this way, one visit at a time, weaving themselves quietly into the fabric of daily life. Even workplaces are not immune. In small factories and bustling offices, workers keep a box tucked into their lockers or desk drawers. They speak of the powder during lunch breaks, laughing as they compare brands and boast about which formula glows brightest. A clerk in a dusty office insists the powders help him feel more alert during long afternoons. His colleagues nod in agreement, their acceptance grounded less in research and more in the satisfying sight of a glow that feels reassuringly modern. As the months pass, advertisements grow bolder, urging every household to adopt the radiant routine. The powders become symbols of progress, tiny beacons of the belief that the future must shine. People buy extra jars to give as gifts, certain that they are offering friends and family a glimpse of something extraordinary. Kitchen drawers fill with them, the glow faint but persistent, casting gentle halos on teaspoons and measuring cups. The powders settle into domestic life so seamlessly that soon no one remembers a time when brushing did not involve a soft shimmer. And through it all, you watch the nation embrace these glowing jars with unshakable faith, convinced that the brightness in their drawers and cabinets is proof that they are living in a marvelous, advancing world. You learn how industrialists chase profit on a morning when factory whistles shriek proudly across the city, echoing off brick walls like a fanfare for ambition. You walk through streets where smokestacks pierce the sky and office doors swing open to release men in tailored suits who smell faintly of cologne and self-assurance. Their briefcases gleam, their hats sit at confident angles, and their strides carry the rhythm of people who believe the nation moves forward because they command it to. They speak loudly in restaurants, loudly in streetcars, loudly anywhere someone might overhear and admire their opinions. Their confidence is not subtle. It rarely needs to be. In a downtown boardroom that feels more like a shrine to polished wood and polished egos, you watch them gather around an oversized table. A glowing jar of radium, tooth powder sits at the center like a decorative trophy, as though it symbolizes the triumph of innovation rather than the questionable brilliance of mixing hygiene with something that hums in the dark. The industrialists lean in close to admire it, their cigars burning steadily, their eyes alight with opportunity. One declares that demand is rising faster than factories can supply. Another boasts that new markets are opening each month. They discuss expansion, advertising, and production quotas with the zeal of generals planning a triumphant campaign. When a junior clerk timidly mentions that a few workers have expressed concern about the glowing dust clinging to their skin, the room freezes for half a breath. Then laughter erupts, hearty and unanimous. The industrialists dismiss the worries with the ease of men brushing crumbs from their vests. One calls the concerns unpatriotic, insisting that doubting modern progress is the first step toward falling behind other nations. Another claims that Americans must embrace the risks of innovation if they hope to lead the world. The clerk shrinks back, chastened, as though he has accidentally insulted the country itself rather than simply mentioning inconvenient discomfort. You follow them to a luncheon at a grand hotel where chandeliers sparkle overhead and waiters glide between tables. The men talk as they eat, slicing their steaks with one hand while gesturing with the other. They exchange stories of successful sales, routes and markets conquered, each tale more embellished than the last. Someone jokes that if radium could be bottled for breakfast cereal, children would grow up glowing with patriotism. The table erupts in laughter. One executive pounds the table so hard the silverware rattles, declaring that the country has no time for timid voices. Another leans back with a satisfied sigh, confident that public enthusiasm will drown out any whisper of doubt. Outside, you observe a group of workers walking past the hotel entrance, their uniforms dusted with a faint shimmer that they try to brush off. Without success. They glance through the tall windows at the industrialists dining inside, but only for a moment. Then they continue down the street with slow steps, burdened not by the glow but by the knowledge that their concerns will never reach the ears of men who profit from brightness. The industrialists inside continue their conversation, unfazed, convinced that the workers' radiance only proves their dedication. Later, you return to the factories where supervisors recite the industrialists' words like doctrine. When an employee hesitates near a barrel of glowing powder, supervisor scolds him for lacking faith in progress. He stresses that modern America thrives because its citizens trust innovation, not because they question it. Workers nod reluctantly, swallowing their unease like medicine. They return to their tasks, coating their hands in the same dust that executives praise from afar. In evening newspapers, opinion columns echo the industrialists' rhetoric. Writers claim that critics of radium products are enemies of advancement. They warn that doubting the brilliance of the age will only slow the nation's rise. The language is sharp, confident, and relentlessly optimistic. Readers absorb it eagerly, trusting the boldness of the words rather than the uncertainty beneath them. As night settles, you stand near a quiet street where factory windows glow faintly from within. The industrialists retire to their homes, satisfied with their progress and bolstered by their unwavering sense of purpose. They believe that profit and patriotism walk hand in hand, and that questioning either is a betrayal of national momentum. The workers trudging home under the same glow see things differently, but their voices dissolve into the shadows. Long before they reach anyone willing to listen, you watch the lights fade behind the factory walls, and it becomes clear how easily confidence can drown out caution, how quickly ambition can smother doubt, and how effortlessly concerns can be labeled unpatriotic until they disappear. You step into the factory, and the first thing you notice is the glow. It hangs in the air in a soft, drifting cloud, settling over the vast room like enchanted snowfall. The dust catches the light of the overhead lamps, turning each beam into a shimmering column that looks more magical than industrial. The floor vibrates beneath your feet from the steady rhythm of machines, metal gears turning with the determination of a nation convinced it is manufacturing the future. You breathe in the warm air, thick with the scent of oil, cotton fibers, and something faintly metallic. The glow swirls gently with every movement, clinging to coats and hair with affectionate stubbornness. Workers move through the haze with practiced ease, their silhouettes outlined by a faint shimmer. Their clothes sparkle at the seams. Their boots leave glowing footprints that linger a moment before fading. They laugh with the camaraderie of people who have accepted the unusual as ordinary, dusting the glowing powder from their sleeves without much thought. Some swipe it from their faces like stray flour, leaving trails of tiny constellations on their skin. The glow makes everything look softer, brighter, as though the factory itself has stepped into a world halfway between progress and fairy tale. A young woman stands at her station, filling tins with powdered radium tooth cleaner. She works with smooth efficiency, scooping the powder from a large barrel that pulses with a steady green light. Each scoop sends the small swirl of dust into the air, drifting upward before mingling with the rest of the luminous haze. She hums under her breath, tapping the tin gently to settle the powder. When you ask if she ever wonders about the glow, she shrugs and grins. She says, "The sparkle makes the job feel cheerful, and, besides, the company insists everything is perfectly safe." She says it the way people repeat something they have heard many times. Nearby, a man oversees a mixing machine that churns steadily, blending ingredients into a smooth, glowing paste. He wipes his brow with a handkerchief that now glimmers faintly and tucks it back into his pocket with a casualness that would alarm someone from another time. He jokes that if the machines ever stop glowing, then he will start worrying. Until then, he trusts the experts who talk confidently about vitality and the wonders of modern science. He calls this the brightest job he has ever had, laughing at his own pun as though the glow has warmed his humor along with everything else. As you walk deeper into the factory, the dust thickens. It drifts from rafters, slips through vents, and settles on beams and crates like powdered moonlight. Workers push carts loaded with tins and tubes that gleam faintly under the lamps, their wheels leaving narrow glowing streaks across the wooden floor. Supervisors move briskly from station to station, clipboards in hand, offering reminders to maintain speed and precision. Their suits sparkle lightly around the cuffs, as though decorated for a celebration they forgot to attend. You pause beside a row of freshly packed crates. The glow inside the gaps between the wooden slats pulses softly, giving the impression that the crates themselves are breathing. A worker hammers the lids shut with rhythmic efficiency, sealing the radiance inside before stacking each box neatly with the others. He wipes his hands on his apron, only to find his palms shining faintly in the dim light. He laughs and holds them up for you to admire, calling it the mark of a modern trade. Far above, on a metal platform, dust swirls like a galaxy caught indoors. It eddies around the machinery, carried by the warm breath of engines and vents. You watch the particles drift, weightless and serene. For a moment, it is easy to forget this place is a factory and not a strange, glowing dream. But the machines continue, their steady clatter, the workers, their practiced motions, and the dust, its quiet descent. It settles into every corner, into every pocket of air, onto every surface, filling the factory with a radiance that no one questions anymore. You stand in the center of the glowing room, surrounded by drifting light, and feel the strange beauty of the moment settle over you like the dust itself. You begin noticing the first quiet warnings on a gray morning when the town feels slightly off balance, as though the wind itself hesitates before moving through the streets. You pass the newspaper stand and see a small article tucked near the bottom of the page, far from the confident headlines and glowing advertisements. It mentions a few workers at a distant factory complaining of persistent aches and strange fatigue. The article is brief, almost apologetic, as if the writer fears being impolite to progress. You read it twice, then watch as another customer glances at the same column, snorts softly, and folds the paper with a dismissive flick. He mutters that modern industry always breeds nervous types. In the pharmacy, the same jars of radium powder gleam on the shelves, but the pharmacist seems distracted. He straightens labels with unnecessary care, avoiding your gaze when you ask whether he has heard any rumors. He smiles too quickly, waving a hand as though brushing away a bothersome fly. He says every era has its worriers, people who cling to old fears instead of embracing opportunity. His voice carries the tight cheerfulness of someone who has repeated the reassurance too many times. Behind him, the glow from the jars casts soft reflections on the glass, making his forced optimism shine in a way that feels almost performative. You walk through the streets and overhear conversations, the warnings filtering in like faint static under the usual enthusiasm. A mother complains that her daughter's gums have been unusually sore, but her friend insists it is simply growing pains. A factory worker rubs his wrist while talking about an odd stiffness, only to laugh and blame it on cold weather. A teacher mentions feeling uncharacteristically tired in the afternoons, but quickly corrects herself, saying it must be the excitement of managing lively children. Each concern flickers briefly, like a match struck in a drafty room, then vanishes beneath the yound. Steady glow of collective faith. At a dinner party, you listen as a guest recounts a worrying story about a cousin who works at one of the larger radium plants. She describes a persistent pain in the woman's jaw, a strange sensitivity that will not fade. The table falls silent for a breath before another guest clears his throat loudly and insists that new industries always come with small quirks. He lifts his glass and toasts to progress, declaring that the nation must not let faint-heartedness dim its bright horizon. The guests laugh in relief, grateful to return to the comfortable glow of certainty. No one asks for more details. In the following weeks, you notice more small symptoms woven into daily life like loose threads. A clerk at the general store shakes her hand after lifting a heavy crate, her face twisting for a moment before smoothing into her usual smile. A neighbor coughs softly as he sweeps his porch, brushing aside the sound with a comment about dust. When a barber complains that his fingertips feel oddly tender, he chuckles and claims he must have sharpened his scissors too enthusiastically. Each instance feels quiet, fleeting, overshadowed by the same unwavering belief that anything radiant must be good. Meanwhile, radium advertisements grow even brighter, their bold claims plastered across windows and billboards. They promise vigor, resilience, boundless health, and dazzling smiles. They drown out the murmurs with cheerful slogans and illustrations of glowing families who seem immune to doubt. The brightness becomes a shield, a comforting barrier people use to protect themselves from the discomfort of uncertainty. You stand in the midst of it all, noticing how easily the town smooths over each warning, trusting the glow more than the whispering. Unease. People choose radiance over reason, convinced that progress could never harm them, convinced that anything shimmering must be proof of safety. And slowly, quietly, those warnings fade into the background, swallowed by the nation's steady march toward a future that shines just a bit too brightly. You meet the early critics on an afternoon when the streets shimmer with the usual glow of advertisements, the kind that make every storefront look slightly enchanted. The critics stand out, not because they look unusual, but because they do not glow. They carry notebooks instead of jars, pens instead of polished sales smiles. Their expressions carry the weary determination of people who have been trying to shout across a room filled with applause. They move through the town square, handing out pamphlets printed on plain paper, the ink slightly smudged, the words lacking the sparkle that everyone has grown so fond of. One critic approaches you with careful steps, as though he expects to be brushed aside at any moment. He adjusts his round spectacles and offers you a pamphlet filled with cautious phrases like "proceed carefully" and "potential risks." His voice is gentle, almost apologetic, and he struggles to find the right tone, as though he is battling the overwhelming brightness of the era with nothing but soft-spoken logic. He talks about chemical reactions, about long-term studies that do not yet exist, about workers who feel fatigue settling into their bones. You listen, but it is difficult to focus because a glowing tooth powder display across the street keeps catching the corner of your eye. Another critic joins him, a schoolteacher with ink-stained fingers and a stubborn tilt to her chin. She explains that she has been collecting stories from students whose parents feel unwell, though she admits the symptoms are vague and easily dismissed. Her voice tightens with frustration when she mentions how her concerns were laughed off by a local doctor who told her that modern life simply overwhelms old-fashioned constitutions. She keeps speaking, her words steady even as passers-by whisk past her with dismissive smiles, clutching their glowing purchases like talismans of progress. Near the fountain, a third critic sets up a small folding table covered with pamphlets, charts, and notes held down by a paperweight shaped like an owl. He calls out to pedestrians with earnest concern, trying to draw attention to the way workers from certain factories cough into handkerchiefs that shimmer faintly in the sun. He points to a crude sketch of a jawbone, trying to explain an ache that seems to spread through workers who handle the glowing powders. People approach him briefly, nod politely, and then drift away toward the nearby booth, offering free samples of radiant gum. The critic sighs, rubbing his forehead, his shoulders sinking slightly under the weight of being overshadowed by something that glows. You watch the critic's attempt to speak. At a town meeting held in a modest hall where the walls are adorned with posters celebrating national progress. When one critic steps forward to voice his concerns, he holds his notes with trembling hands, determined yet visibly nervous. He begins explaining his observations with careful phrasing, but most people shift in their seats, glancing toward a jar of glowing toothpaste placed on the podium as if it were the guest of honor. A councilman interrupts the critic with a cheerful laugh, reassuring the audience that the nation's brightest minds would not approve anything unsafe. The room fills with nods of agreement, and the critic's words fade beneath a tide of comforting certainty. Outside the hall, the critics gather in a small circle, speaking in low voices about how difficult it is to convince a town that has already fallen in love with its own radiance. They share their frustrations, their doubts, and occasionally their hope that someone, somewhere, will listen long enough to ask a question that cannot be brushed aside. They do not glow, and that alone makes them stand out in a world that has grown accustomed to brightness as proof of value. You walk with one of put them down a quiet street at dusk. He explains how he once believed in the same glowing promises until he noticed the quiet complaints that everyone else seemed eager to forget. He speaks with a mixture of conviction and exhaustion, as if trying to hold on to reason in a world mesmerized by soft, green light. He stops beneath a street lamp and looks at you with earnest eyes, asking only that you keep listening, even when the rest of the town refuses. And as you stand there, hearing his voice compete with the distant shine of shop windows, you realize how difficult it is for any warning to be taken seriously when it must speak louder than a jar that glows. You trace the first medical reports on a rainy afternoon when the town feels quieter than usual, as though the clouds have settled low enough to press conversation into murmurs. You sit in a modest waiting room while the doctor flips through papers in the next room, the scent of alcohol and chalky tablets drifting beneath the door. When he finally invites you in, he gestures to a stack of reports on his desk, their pages slightly curled at the corners. He speaks with the caution of a man who has stumbled onto something unsettling but has not yet decided how loudly he should say it. He mentions cases of jaw tenderness, unusual fatigue, and gums that bleed with less provocation than they should. His tone is careful, measured, as though he is afraid the walls might take offense. You leaf through the reports, noticing the handwriting of different physicians, each entry carrying a hesitant certainty. They describe teeth that ache persistently despite rigorous brushing, and patients who complain of headaches that spread behind the eyes like a slow, creeping tide. Some notes mention a dull ache in the town, bones, especially around the mouth and wrists. The doctors speculate quietly, using words like peculiar and baffling, unwilling to commit to anything more concrete. Yet the repetition is unmistakable, symptoms echoing from one report to the next like an uneasy chorus. Outside, you walk through town, with the reports still heavy in your mind. You pass a grocery store where a cheerful advertisement for Radium products hangs in the window, its glowing edges casting a soft reflection across the glass. A woman inside proudly points to a jar in her basket, explaining to a friend how her dentist recommended it for strengthening enamel. They speak with the bright eagerness of people who trust new discoveries more than old caution. Their laughter rings clearly across the aisle, light and certain, untouched by the quiet unease trickling through medical offices. Later, you visit a small clinic on the edge of town where a young nurse sorts through patient files with furrowed brows. She hesitates before handing you one of the charts, biting her lip as though torn between duty and discretion. The chart describes a factory worker who has begun losing weight without explanation, his appetite waning, his sleep restless. His teeth, once bright from daily brushing with radium powder, have become strangely sensitive. The nurse taps the paper thoughtfully, then shakes her head and says she has mentioned her concerns to the supervising doctor. But he insists the symptoms must have another cause, something simpler, something less modern. In another town, you speak to an older physician who has practiced medicine long enough to distrust anything that arrives in shining colors. He tells you about a woman whose jawbone feels fragile to the touch, as though softened by something unseen. He lowers his voice when he mentions that she used Radium cosmetics daily, believing the glow made her complexion appear youthful. He confesses he has noticed similar patterns in other patients, but each time he suggests a possible connection, he is met with disbelief or irritation. People do not to want their modern miracles questioned. You begin noticing small details you once overlooked. A clerk who frequently rubs her lower jaw while ringing up purchases. A seamstress who pauses mid-stitch, pressing a hand to her cheek with a puzzled expression. A delivery boy who complains of persistent tooth pain despite his bright, glowing smile. Each one dismisses the symptoms with excuses about stress, weather, or poor sleep. They trust the products that promise vitality. They trust the glow that makes everything look healthy. As the reports accumulate, you feel the weight of their implications settle like a slow fog. The doctors do not yet have answers, only suspicions. The warnings are still whispers, tucked into margins of charts and quiet conversations behind closed doors. They lack the brightness needed to compete with the radiant advertisements plastered across billboards and newspapers. They lack the glamour people have grown accustomed to trusting, but the pattern grows harder to ignore. The smiles that once seemed so luminous now carry shadows. The glow that once symbolized progress begins to resemble a question left unanswered. And as you walk away from another clinic clutching another report, you feel the steady shift in the air, subtle but undeniable, like the first faint crack in a beautiful facade. You watch families remain loyal to the trend on a bright Saturday morning when every front porch seems to echo with laughter and the clatter of breakfast dishes. The town hums with its usual confidence, the kind polished daily by glowing smiles and newspaper columns praising modern advancements. You pass a row of houses where curtains sway gently in the breeze, revealing glimpses of families gathered around their tables. Children chatter excitedly, waving their toothbrushes like trophies, while parents nod approvingly. The glow of the toothpaste has become so ordinary that no one pauses to question it. They speak of it the same way they speak of school grades and crop prices, with the calm assurance of people who trust the eight. Familiar. Inside one home, a mother lines her 3 children by the sink with military precision, instructing them to brush long enough for the glow to reach full strength. The children giggle at their reflections, delighted by the soft halo around their mouths. Their father stands nearby, buttoning his shirt, checking his own gleaming smile in the mirror with clear satisfaction. He tells them that a bright appearance shows discipline, cleanliness, and modern sensibilities. The mother nods along, her own teeth shimmering faintly. She taps the jar proudly, saying it is endorsed by neighbors, co-workers, and the clever men in newspapers. And if everyone is using it, it must be doing something right. Further down the street, you visit another family where 4 generations live under one roof. The grandmother, once skeptical of anything new, now dips her brush into the glowing powder with the same seriousness once reserved for sacred rituals. She insists her teeth feel lighter, as though buoyed by invisible strength. Her daughter praises the product for making mornings easier, because the children brush willingly when their toothpaste looks enchanted. The teenage son claims his. Smile gets him extra attention from girls at school, proudly calling it his secret advantage. No one mentions the dull ache in his jaw that comes and goes. They chalk it up to growing older, standing taller, becoming a man. At the corner grocery, you overhear families comparing brands while filling their baskets. One woman insists her favorite powder glows a little brighter than the others, meaning it must be stronger. Another argues that a gentler glow is ideal for smaller children. A man steps into the conversation to boast that he uses a concentrated formula recommended by his barber, and everyone leans in as though he has revealed insider wisdom. No one brings up the strange stories trickling through town, the rumors of aching teeth or bone weariness. If anything, those tales are dismissed with amused disbelief. People assure themselves that if danger were real, surely the newspapers would mention it. Surely the doctors would warn them. Surely someone with authority, someone with confidence and a loud enough voice, would say something clear and definitive. You visit a family hosting relatives from out of town. They present their glowing jars with the pride of collectors showing off prized artifacts. The visiting cousins marvel at the radiance and ask to try it themselves. After the first brushing, they grin at one another, laughing at their glittering reflections. The host family beams, pleased to have offered a piece of their modern lifestyle. They claim the glow represents health and national progress. Over dinner, they discuss how strange it is that some people are hesitant about using something so widely approved. They shake their heads, amused by the idea that anyone would question a trend embraced by nearly everyone they know. In the evenings, as lamps flicker on across the neighborhood, you see families gathering on porches, their smiles glowing in the soft twilight. They talk about school, work, marriage, harvests, and weather, each topic blending seamlessly into the next. When the conversation turns to the latest Radium products, the tone changes slightly, lifting with enthusiasm. They share advice, recipes, and brushing techniques as casually as exchanging gossip about local events. The skepticism of a few strangers means nothing when everyone you trust glows with certainty. You stand at the edge of a quiet street as dusk settles, watching the faint radiance drift through open windows like a shared belief woven into the fabric of daily life. Families across town hold tight to the trend because letting go would mean admitting doubt, stepping away from the comfort of the crowd, or questioning something that has brought them pride, wonder, and a sense of belonging. They cling to the glow because it is easier than facing the dim possibility that it might be leading them somewhere they do not want to go. You witness the workers suffer mysterious symptoms on a cold morning when the factory yard sits under a thin veil of frost, its edges glowing faintly from the dust that lingers everywhere. You arrive as the first shift trudges inside, their boots crunching against the ground, their breath forming pale clouds in the air. At a glance, they look the same as they always have, sleeves rolled back, lunch pails in hand, faces set with the sturdy determination of people who have learned to trust routine over curiosity. Yet there is something different, something frailer beneath the surface, as if the glow has begun making decisions none of them agreed to. Inside the factory, the radiant haze hangs thicker than usual, swirling lazily under the lamps. You watch a young man at the mixing station pinch the bridge of his nose before bending over his work with a forced smile. His hands glow brightest near the knuckles, the dust settling into his skin like an opinionated shadow that refuses to be brushed away. When he flexes his fingers, a faint wince crosses his face, but he waves off concern with a laugh, insisting he must have slept oddly. His voice cracks slightly, betraying a worry he does not have the courage to name. A woman at the packing table hums as she places tins into crates, but there is a tremor in her hands that was not there the last time you visited. She pauses occasionally to rub her jaw, gently probing an invisible ache that refuses to leave her alone. When you ask if she is feeling well, she nods quickly, too quickly, and says she is fine, just tired. She glances toward the supervisor's office as she speaks, as though the walls themselves disapprove of hesitation. Her fingertips glow with stubborn brightness, even when she clenches them into fists. You follow a pair of workers on their break as they sit beside a stack of crates, warming their hands with cups of coffee that steam in the cold air. One coughs into his handkerchief, frowning when he pulls it back to reveal a faint shimmer on the cloth. He folds it hastily, tucks it away, and mutters about dust in the air. His friend tries to make a joke, claiming that glowing handkerchiefs will be the next fashionable accessory. The laughter that follows is thin, as if both men are trying to hear conviction where none exists. In the corner of the factory floor, a veteran worker leans against a support beam, breathing slowly, carefully, like someone measuring each breath before taking. His skin glows softly beneath the collar of his shirt, a gentle pulse of light that trails along his throat. He presses a hand against his ribs as though steadying something deep inside. When you ask how long he has felt this way, he gives a weary smile and says the glow is simply settling in. He repeats the phrase with the resignation of a man who knows the truth but refuses to speak it aloud. The supervisors stroll through the aisles with their usual confidence, clipboards tucked under their arms, eyes focused on productivity charts rather than the people who create them. When a worker stumbles slightly, one supervisor claps him on the back and tells him to drink more water. Another insists that aches are normal during seasonal changes. Their words float through the room like well-rehearsed lines that have been spoken too often to sound genuine. The workers nod obediently, grateful for any explanation that allows them to keep believing the glow is harmless. You move toward the loading dock where fresh crates are stacked high, their contents shimmering faintly through tiny gaps in the wood. A young woman sits on a nearby stool, cradling her wrist as though it has turned fragile overnight. She tries to straighten when she sees you watching, but the effort pulls a quiet groan from her throat. She insists she is fine. Everyone insists they are fine. It has become the unofficial anthem of the factory, repeated each time the glow clings a little tighter. As the day stretches on, the symptoms become harder to ignore. More workers rub their jaws, more mutter about lingering aches, more step away from their stations for a moment of stillness they cannot explain. The glow trails after them like a second skin, a loyal shadow with too many opinions and too little mercy. When the shift ends, the workers file out into the fading light, their bodies shimmering faintly as they walk home. The glow follows them into the world beyond the factory gates, slipping into kitchens, bedrooms, and dinner tables. It clings to them as faithfully as hope once did. And as you watch them disappear down the road, you feel the weight of something unspoken settling over the town, a quiet dread wrapped in a beautiful light that no one is ready to see clearly. You see the government hesitate in rooms that echo with polished floors, ticking clocks, and the uneasy rustle of papers no one wants to read. You are invited into one such meeting, a long chamber filled with high windows that let in more light than comfort. Officials gather around a heavy oak table, their jackets crisp, their expressions carefully composed. On the surface, they look decisive, strong, and confident, but their eyes betray the tension of people who have been handed a problem that refuses to stay polite. The glow from the radium products they keep on the sideboard seems strangely out of place, shining too cheerfully in a room heavy with doubt. One official clears his throat and begins, reading a report about workers suffering unexplained ailments, his voice wobbling slightly as though he is wrestling with the words. He moves quickly through the troubling parts, lingering instead on the vague, reassuring phrases that promise more research. Another official insists that the public loves these products, that the glow has become a symbol of national strength, and that questioning them openly might cause unnecessary panic. He gestures at the stack of advertisements clipped from newspapers, each page praising radiant health, each image glowing with the confidence the officials sorely lack. A third official, older than the rest, sits quietly with a finger pressed against his temple. He studies the medical reports scattered before him, frowning at the patterns emerging from distant clinics and factory towns. He asks pointed questions, the kind that land heavily on the table like stones dropped into still water. What happens if the symptoms worsen? What if the glow is not harmless? What if the nation's enthusiasm has raced ahead of its caution? The younger officials shift uneasily, avoiding his gaze as though his concerns are impolite in the presence of products that shine so beautifully. They debate with careful voices, never quite sinking into honesty. They speak of public trust, of national pride, of the economic boom tied to the glowing industry. One insists that any warning must be subtle, wrapped in enough ambiguity to avoid provoking fear. Another proposes forming a committee, which everyone agrees is a suitably gentle response that requires little immediate action. They seem desperate to maintain the illusion of control, clutching at the glow as if it can shield them from responsibility. Outside the chamber, you wander through corridors lined with portraits of officials who once made confident decisions with decisive strokes. Their painted eyes seem to watch the hesitation unfolding in the present day with quiet disappointment. Secretaries carry stacks of letters from concerned citizens, but most are sent to storage rooms rather than action desks. Clerks whisper about factories reporting unusual illnesses, but they lower their voices when supervisors walk by. The halls are filled with information, but only a fraction of it is allowed to breathe. In a smaller meeting room, a pair of mid-level analysts spread the charts across a table. They trace the rising number of complaints with pencils that tap nervously against the wood. They argue that something is wrong, that the data points are forming patterns too consistent to ignore. Their supervisor listens but responds with practiced caution. He reminds them that powerful people do not appreciate unwelcome conclusions, especially when the public adores the subject in question. He instructs them to revise their analysis in softer terms, focusing on potential coincidences rather than clear correlations. Meanwhile, the public's enthusiasm continues to pulse just outside the government's doorstep. Through the tall windows, you see families strolling past glowing advertisements with cheerful certainty. Children swing their lunch pails, mothers compare products in shop windows, and workers walk to their jobs with hopeful expressions, despite fatigue settling into their bones. The glow has become part of the culture, woven into morning routines and patriotic pride. The officials know this, and it weighs on them. To question the glow is to question the confidence of the entire nation. To acknowledge the new evidence is to risk unraveling something delicate, something beloved. Their hesitation becomes a quiet force in the room, as heavy as the polished table they sit around. By the time the meeting ends, no decisions have been made. They rise from their chairs with stiff backs and forced smiles, each man carrying the burden of uncertainty like a shadow that grows longer with every hour. And as you step back into the corridor, you realize the nation stands at a fragile crossroads, lit not by clarity, but by a glow too bright for anyone to look at directly. You follow the journalists as they begin their work in crowded newsrooms that smell of ink, tobacco, and urgent conversation. The room hums with the clatter of typewriters and the low murmur of voices trading fragments of rumor and fact. You watch a young reporter hunched over his desk, sleeves rolled to his elbows, brow furrowed as he rereads a letter from a factory foreman describing workers who can no longer lift crates without wincing. The reporter taps his pencil absently against the edge of the page, fighting the weight of what the words imply. Finally, he exhales sharply and begins typing, the keys snapping like sparks in the dim light. Across the room, an older journalist flips through medical notes from a doctor brave enough to defy public consensus. The notes describe strange lesions, aching bones, teeth loosening without cause. The journalist runs a hand over his face and mutters that it sounds like fiction. The kind readers might accuse him of inventing for dramatic effect. He leans back in his chair, glancing toward the glowing advertisement pasted on the window by the sales department. The contrast is unsettling. Radiance on one side of the glass, reality on the other. He pulls the notes closer and begins outlining a story that will certainly earn him criticism, if not worse. As articles begin trickling into print, the nation barely notices at first. Most readers skim past the pieces, their eyes trained to search for cheerful headlines and shining promises. But some linger, puzzled by the tone of concern woven into the paragraphs. A mother reads a story about a factory girl who suffers from constant bone aches and frowns thoughtfully before turning the page. A barber reads an article about unsafe working conditions and mutters skepticism under his breath, unwilling to surrender his trust in products that have become part of his daily routine. Even the skeptics close their papers with a sigh, the glow of their own enthusiasm briefly dimmed. The journalists persist. They travel to factories, where they speak quietly with workers in break rooms that smell of sweat and glowing dust. They listen to men complain about strange pains that flare in their joints, and women who can no longer chew tough bread without discomfort. They take notes quickly, glancing over their shoulders when supervisors walk by. Some workers hesitate to speak, afraid of losing their jobs or being mocked for doubting progress. But others pour out their worries with tired voices, grateful for someone willing to write down what they have been trying to ignore. Back in the newsroom, editors gather around pages of copy laid out on long tables. They argue softly about how boldly they can present the facts without being accused of fear-mongering. The city editor, a man with ink-stained cuffs and a deep sense of responsibility, insists that truth must come before comfort. He tells his staff that if they want to be trusted, they must be willing to write what people do not want to read. His voice carries the conviction of someone who has made this argument many times before. The first major investigative article appears on the front page of a Sunday edition, its headline serious but not sensational. The story details a cluster of workers whose health has declined mysteriously, accompanied by interviews from doctors unable to dismiss the growing pattern. The tone is steady, measured, and quietly devastating. You watch readers gather around newspaper stands, squinting at the headline, their expressions tightening as they read. Some shake their heads, others fold the paper slowly, their mourning brightened just a little less than usual. In the weeks that follow, more stories emerge. A mother who brushed her children's teeth with radium powder speaks tearfully about their sudden jaw pains. A physician reveals a troubling number of patients suffering from unexplained weakness. A factory foreman admits, reluctantly, that several employees have taken long absences due to persistent illness. Each article is a candle held against the glow of national enthusiasm, casting shadows where none were visible before. You witness the slow shift in public mood as these stories accumulate. People still buy the glowing products, but they pause for a heartbeat longer before placing them in their baskets. Families still brush their teeth with shimmering toothpaste, but their conversations tilt slightly toward uncertainty. The advertisements continue their cheerful glow, but now, beneath the radiance, something fragile begins to tremble. The journalists return to their typewriters each day, gathering new stories, sharpening their questions, and peeling back the layers of a narrative the nation once wore like a badge of progress. Their work does not cause panic. It causes something quieter, more profound. It causes doubt. And as you watch the newsroom hum with determined purpose, you realize that the glow is no longer blinding the country the way it once did. The shine is still there, but the shadows have finally learned how to speak. You stand with the first whistleblowers, in dim back rooms and quiet corners, where voices must stay low for fear of carrying through thin walls. These are not dramatic figures draped in heroism. They are ordinary people who have grown tired of swallowing their doubts along with the glow that coats their hands and clothes. You meet them in a storage room behind a factory office, the single bulb overhead flickering as if it already knows too much. The air smells of wood, dust, and old ledgers, and the whistleblower in front of you rubs his glowing fingertips together nervously, leaving faint sparks that drift like fireflies before disappearing. He explains, in a voice tight with exhaustion, that he has been documenting every illness he sees on the factory floor. He shows you a notebook filled with lists of names, dates, and symptoms, each line written with the urgency of someone trying to outrun time. He admits he tried to raise concerns quietly months ago, but his supervisor laughed and told him the glow was proof. The workers were contributing to progress, not suffering from it. When he pushed further, the tone shifted, and he was warned that undermining public confidence could cost him his job. He kept writing, anyway. It is the only thing that makes him feel sane. Another whistleblower meets you behind a newspaper office late one evening, stepping out of the shadows with the reluctance of someone who has rehearsed the consequences far more often than the words. She is a laboratory assistant who once believed wholeheartedly in the shimmering promise of radium. Now she carries a stack of internal memos hidden beneath her coat, the pages filled with measurements and observations her supervisors dismissed as anomalies. Her voice cracks when she confesses that she noticed her own jaw aching months before she dared to suspect the cause. She tells you she ignored it, like everyone ignores their first warning, because the glow was easier to believe in than the alternative. You stand beside a third whistleblower on a quiet street near dusk, the glow of his fingertips dimming in the fading light. He is a shipping clerk who oversees crates of radium products heading to stores across the country. He speaks with a mixture of guilt and determination, saying he cannot bear to keep sending out shipments, knowing the workers who pack them suffer more with each passing week. He tells you about the young girl in the mixing department who collapsed 2 days ago, her body trembling as though the glow had reached too deeply. The foreman called it exhaustion. The clerk calls it something else, something he can no longer pretend not to see. Together, they form a fragile line of people who understand they have crossed an invisible boundary, stepping into a role no one asked them to play. They share their stories with careful precision, their eyes flicking toward windows and doorways whenever footsteps echo nearby. They know their careers hang by threads thinner than the dust drifting through their factories. They know their names could be erased from payrolls with a single irritated gesture. They know standing here, speaking these truths, could cost them the security that once kept them silent, yet they keep talking. Their hands shake, their voices waver, but they speak anyway, as though saying the words aloud gives them a tiny piece of control over a situation that has spiraled far beyond their reach. They pass you documents, medical notes, internal letters, anything that might convince a public still captivated by the glow. They tell you they do not expect gratitude, only that someone, anyone, must finally listen. Outside, the town still hums with the familiar brightness of belief, unaware of the small storm gathering in rooms like this one. Families brush their teeth with radiant powders. Factories hum with productivity. Advertisements glow in shop. To windows. Everything looks normal from a distance. But standing here in the dim light, surrounded by people brave enough to risk everything for the truth, you feel the first shift in the air. It is small, almost imperceptible, a tiny crack in the glowing facade that once seemed unbreakable. And you realize that sometimes change begins not with grand speeches or public outcry, but with a handful of trembling voices whispering in the shadows, hoping their warnings will reach someone before the glow consumes everything. You feel the shift the way you feel the weather change before a storm. Not in any dramatic announcement, but in the small tensions that creep into conversation. It begins with a quiet unease that rolls across towns and cities, moving through pharmacies and kitchens like a chill draft that no one wants to acknowledge. You hear it in the baker's voice as he jokes about the local toothpaste being bright enough to double as a lantern, his laugh too forced, his eyes flicking toward the jar as if it might overhear. You sense it in the way mothers pause before handing their children those glowing brushes, lingering just long enough to betray a doubt they will not admit aloud. The glow has stopped feeling magical. It has started feeling like a guest that has overstayed its welcome. People still line up at stores, but the enthusiasm has thinned. They do not chat about vitality quite as loudly. They do not smile quite as confidently when the jars shimmer under the shop lights. The salesmen still perform their upbeat pitches, but their movements are sharper now, as though they are trying to hold back shadows with optimism. One man at a demonstration booth overemphasizes every word about rejuvenation, waving his hands so theatrically that you begin to wonder whether he is selling toothpaste or auditioning for an amateur play. Behind him, a crate marked with glowing residue leaks faintly onto the floor, unnoticed by everyone except you. The newspapers begin carrying small articles buried between gossip about local fairs and the latest invention. Someone claims will revolutionize ironing. These pieces mention illnesses in vague terms, nothing definitive, but enough to raise a few eyebrows. A columnist writes about an unsettling pattern with the careful neutrality of someone who has already been warned not to stir the pot. Even so, readers tuck the newspaper under their arms with a distant expression, as though something half-remembered is tugging at them. They finish their breakfast, look at their toothbrushes, and frown. The shift grows stronger in the factories, where the glow has always been brightest. Workers once laughed about their shimmering fingertips, calling them badges of modernity. Now they scrub longer at the sinks before heading home, scrubbing until their skin reddens, convinced the glow just clings harder out of spite. When they walk past you on the street, they hold their hands tight in their placed pockets. Their smiles are thinner, their steps slower, their spirits dimmer. Some of them cough into handkerchiefs that shine faintly in the evening sun. No one asks why. Asking invites answers, and answers feel like luxuries too heavy to carry. Even the advertisements begin to lose their charm. Those little glowing cherubs that once looked whimsical now seem unsettling, their painted smiles stretched too wide. Posters promising radiance and vigor appear brittle, as though the paper itself knows it is peddling a fantasy. The once charming slogan about brushing yourself into the future now reads like a threat disguised as cheer. You stand in front of a pharmacy window watching families drift past, noticing how many avert their gaze from the glowing displays. When questions finally rise to the surface, they do not burst forth in a single moment. They seep. You hear one on a trolley, car whispered between two women discussing the neighbor's daughter who has been bedridden for weeks. You hear another outside a schoolyard when a father wonders aloud whether glowing gums are normal. These questions fall heavily into the air, marked with the weight of disbelief and the resignation that comes when a dream begins to crack. No one knows the full truth yet, but everyone senses something shifting beneath their feet. The certainty that once lit the nation is dimming, flickering like a dying ember. People begin to pick up their glowing jars with the same cautious hesitation they reserve for unfamiliar insects. They still use the products, yes, because habits and hope cling tightly when fear threatens to take their place. But they do not enjoy it in the same way. They are brushing their teeth with doubt now, each stroke a reminder that the glow no longer feels like progress. And in that quiet, collective hesitation, you feel trust evaporating, turning from belief into suspicion. A miracle ingredient is losing its shine, and in the space left behind, questions gather like a slow, rising tide that no amount of cheerful advertising can hold back. You watch the companies scramble to rebrand, as if someone has kicked over a lantern in a theater full of props. The glow that once made their products look futuristic now feels like an accusation, so they move quickly, desperate to throw a fresh coat of respectability over everything. In their corporate offices, men in crisp suits gather around long tables covered with marketing sketches and half-finished slogans, muttering to one another in frantic whispers. They point at charts showing dipping sales, at letters from concerned citizens, at newspapers folded open to stories they hoped would never appear. Each face holds the same strained expression, the look of a magician forced to admit the rabbit might not just be sleeping in the hat. The first attempt at reassurance arrives in the form of a pamphlet printed on glossy paper that smells faintly of ink and worry. It declares, in cheerful font, that Radium products are perfectly safe when used responsibly, though no one bothers defining what responsible means. The pamphlet advises brushing gently, avoiding ingestion, and consulting a doctor if symptoms occur. It is the kind of advice that manages to sound helpful while saying very little at all. You see families reading it on their porches, squinting at the vague instructions before tucking it into drawers they rarely open. Inside one company's headquarters, you observe a marketing director pacing the length of his office with the rigid posture of a man who has carefully not slept in days. He says they need a new name for their flagship toothpaste, something less radiant and more respectable, something that suggests health without promising miracles. He mutters ideas that grow worse with every step, each one greeted by groans from his staff. The glow is no longer a selling point, he insists. It is a distraction, a misunderstanding, a charming quirk they can downplay with enough fresh branding. Another company hires a team of experts whose main qualification seems to be the ability to speak confidently without saying anything concrete. These consultants appear in magazines offering polished quotes about the importance of consumer education. They assure the public that new tests are underway, tests far more thorough than the ones originally performed. They say the nation has nothing to fear, that the glow is merely an effect, not a cause. Behind the scenes, secretaries feed them notes scribbled with phrases they must avoid, such as bone loss and jaw deterioration. The consultants nod obediently, smoothing their hair as they rehearse lines that sound official enough to soothe a worried population. You step into a factory where the workers look tired but hopeful after hearing that new safety measures are being introduced. Supervisors hand out cloth masks that do little to stop the dust drifting in soft clouds. Posters hang on the walls reminding workers to wash their hands frequently and avoid touching their faces. These reminders are printed beside cheerful illustrations of glowing toothbrushes, as though the marketing team could not bear to part with the shine entirely. Workers glance at the posters with a mix of amusement and suspicion, aware that these efforts might be more about optics than protection. In the boardrooms, executives argue over whether removing the glow entirely might calm public fears. Some suggest switching to harmless dyes to maintain the product's appeal. Others insist the glow is essential to the brand's identity. They do not mention the workers collapsing on factory floors or the letters from doctors describing increasingly serious symptoms. Their conversations orbit around profits, brand loyalty, and how quickly consumers forget the things that once frightened them. You attend a public demonstration hosted by one of the largest companies where a spokesman stands on a platform surrounded by jars that mysteriously glow less brightly than before. He explains that the company has refined its formula to improve safety while preserving the product's benefits. He smiles widely, though his lips tighten at the corners when someone asks why the reformulation was necessary if everything had been safe in the first place. He answers with a practiced laugh, attributing it to progress, innovation, and the natural evolution of products in a modern age. The crowd remains polite, but their clapping is hesitant, as though their palms are more accustomed to holding doubts than applause. Everywhere you go, you see companies trying to outrun the truth with softer lighting, friendlier slogans, and assurances layered so thickly they begin to sound suspicious. The glow that once symbolized modernity has become a reminder of something they cannot quite erase. And as you watch the fevered attempts to polish their image, you sense the rising understanding among the public that companies rushing to prove their safety usually have a reason to be nervous. You follow the families through their kitchens and bathrooms as they quietly begin abandoning the glowing jars that once held a place of honor beside the sink. It does not happen with dramatic declarations or sweeping gestures. It begins with small moments, the kind that slip between conversations and linger in the corners of rooms. A mother pauses with her hand hovering over the toothpaste jar, her brow creasing, ever so slightly before she chooses the older, duller tin tucked behind it. A father notices the faint ache around his gums and mutters something about trying a more familiar option for a while. No one calls it fear. They call it being practical. In one house, a jar that once glowed like a proud, the lantern now sits forgotten on the highest bathroom shelf, wedged between a chipped mug and an unused bottle of hair tonic. The family brushes their teeth with a plain, chalky paste that tastes like mint and nostalgia. The children complain for a day or two, missing the shimmering novelty, but they quickly adapt. Their mother tells them the glow was simply a trend, like the time she tried making everyone drink onion tea for vitality. A memory they all pretend never happened. The explanation works well enough. And soon the glowing jar collects dust instead of admiration. At the corner store, you watch customers wander the hygiene aisle with the hesitancy of people who have lost faith in their own choices. They pick up glowing products, study them for a few seconds, then silently place them back on the shelf with the tenderness usually reserved for fragile antiques. Their hands drift, instead toward the older brands, the ones wrapped in modest packaging, the ones that make no promises other than cleanliness and the absence of surprises. A clerk notices the shift and quietly rearranges the display so the glowing jars occupy less space. He stacks the traditional tins in neat rows near the front, as though offering the town a comfortable retreat from its own bold experiment. In another home, you watch a grandmother who once championed the glowing powder with spirited enthusiasm now scrub it from her bathroom tiles. The residue leaves faint trails of light as she works, which, she insists, are simply spots she missed last week. She directs her granddaughter to fetch a new jar from the kitchen cupboard, but this time the jar contains a familiar plain white paste. She claims it is the one she used in her youth, long before modern trends began complicating simple routines. Her granddaughter asks why they ever stopped using it. The grandmother shrugs and says, "Sometimes people forget the value of ordinary things when something shiny stands in front of them." You walk down the street and see jars left out on porches for the trash collector. Some still glow faintly in the dusk, casting eerie halos on the steps. Neighbors pretend not to notice them, focusing instead on their gardens or the evening sky. The glow that once enchanted them now feels intrusive, too bright for comfort. A boy kicks a jar accidentally while running past, then jumps back as though he has stepped on a hot coal. His father calls him inside with a tone that tries to sound calm, but fails to hide the tension underneath. Restaurants switch back to the old brands for their staff, citing cost or flavor or tradition. Anything to avoid mentioning the real reason. Workers brush their teeth in. The back room, with plain paste squeezed from a metal tube, grateful for the taste of something that does not shimmer. The glow begins disappearing from lunch pails and coat pockets, replaced with items that do not cast light when the lid opens. You notice fewer glowing smiles in the streets. The faint halos around mouths and fingertips that once illuminated evenings have dwindled to occasional flickers. People still talk about the glow, but mostly in soft tones, as though speaking too loudly might reignite it. They reminisce with a mixture of embarrassment and relief, like remembering a fad they embraced with too much enthusiasm. Some families keep their jars tucked away in drawers, unwilling to throw them out entirely but unwilling to use them again. They sit there like relics of an era that passed too quickly, reminders of the moment when the nation believed light could do no harm simply because it was beautiful. And as you watch these jars slowly lose their place in homes across town, you sense a collective exhale, a gentle return to normal routines. The glow fades, not in a dramatic collapse, but in the steady, quiet way people choose safety over novelty, comfort over curiosity, and wisdom over shine. You see the nation confront its fascination with novelty in quiet ways at first, subtle shifts that ripple through daily life like a breeze that carries the scent of something sobering. It begins with conversations in barbershops, where men once boasted about their bright smiles while flipping through glowing advertisements. Now the barber pauses mid-trim, glancing at the shelf where the once beloved jars sit untouched, their shimmer less charming now that questions outshine curiosity. Customers tilt their heads as he speaks, murmuring that perhaps the nation leapt a little too quickly into the future without checking if the ground was sturdy beneath them. The barber nods, sweeping hair from the floor with a gentleness that feels almost ceremonial, as though brushing away an entire era. In kitchens across the country, families gather around tables, cluttered with morning newspapers. They read articles about the unfolding truth aloud, not with anger, but with the slow, heavy disappointment of people discovering that something they trusted has betrayed them. A father taps the page with the back of his spoon, claiming that this is what happens when society becomes too enamored with shine. His wife agrees, stirring her coffee with a thoughtful frown, noting how everyone rushed toward the glow because it looked like progress dressed in magic. Their children listen quietly, absorbing the lesson with wide eyes, as though learning that adults can be fooled just as easily as they can. General stores begin rearranging their shelves. The glowing products, once placed front and center like trophies of modern ingenuity, are moved to the far end where fewer eyes wander. In their place rise rows of older, simpler brands with labels that look almost quaint compared to the glitzy packaging of the recent craze. Shoppers pass by, some chuckling ruefully at their own former enthusiasm, others shaking their heads as they place sensible options into their baskets. The store clerk offers condolences with the tone of a man who has witnessed several cycles of fashionable mistakes and still marvels at humanity's unwavering hope that this time will be different. You attend a town hall meeting where residents gather to discuss what went wrong. The room is filled with sighs and murmurs, chairs scraping as people shift, the atmosphere thick with a mix of embarrassment, frustration, and dawning wisdom. A teacher stands and reminds the crowd how easily they accepted the glowing products, how quickly they dismissed early concerns. She says it softly, without accusation, as if urging the town to forgive itself while still learning from its missteps. A shopkeeper adds that novelty is a powerful lure, especially when wrapped in scientific language and sold with confidence. His words settle into the room like dust, finding its place on a quiet windowsill. On a city street, you watch a group of friends pause in front of an old advertisement plastered on a brick wall. The poster still glows faintly, though the edges have begun to peel. The friends stare at it with the kind of expression usually reserved for old yearbook photos, a blend of nostalgia and disbelief. One jokes lightly that they really thought this stuff was a miracle. Another replies that anything sparkly tends to get more applause than it deserves. Their laughter is subdued, the chuckles layered with humility rather than humor. Even children sense the shift. They no longer chase one another with glowing brushes or boast about whose toothpaste shines brightest. Instead, they hold up their plain brushes triumphantly, declaring them sensible and safe with the seriousness of miniature philosophers. Their parents watch with a mix of pride and lingering guilt, grateful that the sparkle has lost its spell, but wishing the lesson had come at a gentler cost. Across the nation, people find themselves confronting a truth they should have recognized earlier, a truth as old as humanity itself. Sparkle can dazzle, shine can seduce, but neither guarantees goodness. It is a lesson whispered in the spaces between conversations, in the glances exchanged over kitchen tables, in the resigned smiles of workers who have set aside glowing hopes for practical realities. And as you watch this reckoning unfold, you realize the nation is not just abandoning a trend, it is learning to look past the shimmer, searching now for something sturdier, quieter, and far more trustworthy than anything that glows. You watch legislation form slowly, as if the nation has decided that after rushing headfirst into a glowing mistake, it will now move with the deliberate caution of someone lighting a match in a room filled with old memories. You sit in the back of a government chamber where lawmakers gather with stacks of reports, letters from citizens, and troubling medical summaries piled in uneven towers. Their conversations ripple through the room in low tones, seasoned with the uneasy humility of people who finally understand the cost of moving too quickly. The glow once admired as a symbol of progress now lingers in their minds like a warning bell that refuses to stop ringing. One representative stands with a sheet of paper trembling slightly in his hand. He reads aloud the testimony of a factory worker who can no longer lift his arms without pain. His voice falters, not because he doubts the words, but because he knows that he helped promote the very products now causing harm. The others around him shift uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes drifting toward the floorboards as if searching for absolution hidden in the wood. Grain. They once proudly embraced the glow, celebrated it in articles and speeches. Now they must decide what to do with the truth that has settled upon them like dust. Committees form after long evenings filled with debate. Each committee begins collecting information, consulting scientists and physicians who were once brushed aside. These experts speak slowly and carefully, aware that their caution is finally being taken seriously. They describe symptoms, patterns, and the lingering trail of illness left behind by a trend that dazzled the nation. Some lawmakers listen with grave focus, their pens moving steadily as they jot down notes. Others pinch the bridges of their noses, as though their heads ache from the realization that their oversight has contributed to a national wound. You walk through the hallways between sessions, watching aides hurry with folders pressed tightly to their chests. They whisper updates to one another with the seriousness usually reserved for wartime preparations. There is no glamour left in the glow, no pride, only the sober understanding that progress without caution is not progress at all. You hear them discussing limits, restrictions, and mandatory warnings. Their words echo off marble walls that once carried only optimism. The legislation takes shape in drafts filled with crossouts, revisions, and handwritten notes scribbled in margins. The first proposals are timid, crafted by lawmakers still recovering from the embarrassment of being fooled. They suggest mild warnings, gentle advisories to consumers, but those suggestions are quickly met with frustration from colleagues who have read far too many medical reports to tolerate half measures. They argue that the nation needs stronger protections, clearer rules, firmer boundaries. Their voices rise, not in anger, but in conviction born from hindsight. In committee rooms, lawmakers debate the difference between innovation and recklessness. One senator states plainly that the nation must never again allow novelty to outrun knowledge. His words land with the weight of a vow. Another adds that for all their pride in modern advancements, they must now accept that even the brightest inventions require scrutiny as sharp as any blade. The room falls quiet at this, a silence shaped by agreement. Outside the chambers, citizens gather, some hopeful, some angry, some weary. They speak with reporters about the long months of confusion, about their lingering aches, about their disappointment in leaders who should have asked more questions. Their voices shape the public demand for accountability, adding pressure to lawmakers already struggling under the weight of responsibility. You see families holding jars that no longer glow, carrying them like relics they wish they could forget. They demand assurances that future products will be tested with rigor rather than enthusiasm. As legislation nears completion, you witness a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The lawmakers sit straighter. Their discussions grow more focused. They begin crafting laws requiring testing, transparency, and oversight. Each line written with a determination to prevent history from repeating itself. The glow that once captivated them has become the very symbol of what they strive to guard against. By the time the final draft is presented, it carries the steady imprint of caution earned through hardship. The lawmakers cast their votes with solemn faces, aware that they are closing the chapter on a mistake that taught them humility. The room fills with a quiet sense of resolve rather than celebration, and as you step out into the evening air, you feel the nation turning a page. The glow has dimmed, but in its place rises something steadier, a promise built slowly, shaped by hard lessons, and written with the kind of care that only comes after the shine has faded. You reflect on how a glowing trend shaped American consumer culture while standing in a quiet kitchen where the last faint traces of that era linger only in memory. You run your fingers along the shelf where a radiant jar once sat proudly, the glass long since discarded, but the outline of its place still etched into your mind. You think about how easily the nation embraced the glowing promise, how quickly people equated brightness with truth, and how eagerly they placed their faith in products that shimmered with the illusion of progress. In those days, anything that sparkled felt trustworthy, as though radiance itself could stand in for scientific certainty. You remember the advertisements that lined newspapers and billboards, each one insisting that the glow was not only safe but beneficial. They shaped buying habits in ways that felt almost hypnotic. People bought not just toothpaste, powders, and creams. They bought identity, modernity, the feeling of belonging to a future that gleamed from every page. You watched families cradle those glowing jars like tiny trophies of sophistication, convinced they were participating in something grand. Their trust was not blind so much as dazzled, the light so bright that it made the questions around the edges blur into insignificance. You think about the scientists whose confident statements served as the backbone of this belief. Many were earnest, working with the limited knowledge of the time, convinced that they stood on the brink of a breakthrough. Their certainty fueled the public's affection for radium, turning it into a symbol of unstoppable progress. Yet beneath their confidence lay gaps, guesses wrapped in the comforting language of scientific authority. You watched how quickly the public learned to treat a lab coat like an oracle, trusting the glow because someone with impressive credentials declared it a miracle. Consumer culture swelled with that trust, turning scientific discovery into a commodity. Stores displayed glowing products as proudly as if they were works of art, placing them at the front of aisles where sunlight could catch the shimmer just right. People bought them with the same eagerness they showed for new inventions, delighted by the sense of being part of an exclusive club that understood the future before it arrived. Even those who hesitated eventually joined in, unwilling to stand apart from the tide of enthusiasm. The glow became a badge of belonging, and belonging is a powerful force. But as the truth surfaced slowly, painfully, The trust that once seemed unshakable began to fracture. You remember the first murmurs of doubt, the tentative questions whispered at dinner tables, the careful glances exchanged in grocery aisles. Consumer confidence shifted from excitement to unease, from desire to caution. The glow had promised health and vitality, but it delivered something far more complicated when the nation finally confronted the consequences that once eager trust in science became threaded with skepticism. People learned that scientific discovery was not infallible, that innovation could mislead as easily as it could illuminate. You reflect on how the experience reshaped expectations. Consumers demanded clearer evidence, stronger oversight, more transparency. They became more guarded, less willing to leap toward the next shiny wonder without asking what it might cost. The government, once content to let enthusiasm outrun caution, learned that progress required guardrails just as much as it needed imagination. Even advertisements changed, softening their promises, toning down their exuberance, as though trying not to repeat the mistakes that had once sparkled too brightly. Yet for all the discomfort, the era taught the nation something vital. It revealed that scientific trust must be earned, not assumed. That novelty is not a virtue in itself. That progress requires patience, scrutiny, and humility. Standing there in the quiet kitchen, you realize that the glow did more than illuminate teeth and factory floors. It illuminated the complex relationship between science and society, showing how hope and dyes, caution must walk side by side if either is to survive. You take a slow breath, feeling the weight of that lesson settle gently. The jars may be gone, but the memory lingers as a reminder that brilliance can blind as easily as it can guide, and that even the brightest trends must eventually face the clarity of day. You step into the legacy of the era by walking through a museum gallery that smells faintly of old paper and polished wood, the kind of place where history folds itself neatly into exhibits and quiet placards. The room is dim but intentional, lit by soft lamps that cast warm glows on glass cases. Inside, one case sits a small radium toothpaste jar, still faintly luminous after all these years. You lean closer, half expecting it to whisper promises of vitality the way it once did to an entire nation. Instead, it sits silent, humbled by time, a relic of optimism that ran too far ahead of knowledge. A guide speaks softly nearby, explaining to a small group how the glowing craze forced the country to redefine its relationship with modernity. She gestures to charts showing the evolution of safety standards, tracing how tentative guidelines hardened into firm requirements. You listen as she describes early efforts to test consumer products, steps that were once considered overly cautious but eventually became expected. She talks about committees formed in the aftermath of the Radium era, groups tasked with examining everything from cosmetics to medicine with sharper scrutiny. Their work built foundations that future generations would take for granted, layers of protection shaped by mistakes that no one wished to relive. You move to another display where documents from scientific institutions lie carefully preserved. They are filled with revisions, crossed-out assumptions, and handwritten notes scribbled in margins by researchers who realized too late that enthusiasm is not a substitute for evidence. Their uncertainty is visible on the page, the ink trembling slightly where someone hesitated before striking through a once confident claim. You can almost feel their frustration, their dawning understanding that caution should have arrived long before the glow dimmed. The legacy stretches beyond laboratories and legislation. In one corner, a panel recounts how journalism changed in response to the era's fallout. Reporters who once accepted corporate claims learned to question more boldly, digging deeper, demanding transparency. Their stories helped shape a culture that expected accountability, not just charm. You recall how those early journalists, sitting in smoky rooms with typewriters rattling like nervous hearts, slowly pried open a truth the nation needed to hear. Their vigilance became part of the fabric of consumer protection, a reminder that storytelling can shape safety as surely as science. You pass a timeline that traces how industries reformed their approaches. Companies grew less eager to chase novelty without testing its consequences, though not always by choice. Insurance demands changed, manufacturing standards changed, even advertisements grew more cautious, shedding their extravagant claims and glowing promises for language more grounded, more responsible. The legacy is visible in the labels of modern products, those small lines of fine print born from an era when the nation learned that transparency must not be optional. Toward the back of the exhibit, you find a quiet space dedicated to the people who suffered. Their names are etched into a wall lit by steady, gentle light, not the bright, theatrical glow of radium, but something softer, respectful, acknowledging the cost of lessons learned too slowly. You read the names and feel a heaviness settle over you, not sharp sorrow, but the sober recognition of how progress is often purchased with mistakes that echo far beyond their moment. The guide's voice fades behind you as she speaks to the group about accountability, about how safety standards were strengthened because those voices refused to disappear quietly. When you step outside the exhibit, the sunlight feels ordinary in the best possible way. No shimmer, no artificial glow, just clean light that doesn't ask to be trusted. It simply is. You watch people walking past, carrying groceries, chatting with friends, living lives supported by layers of regulations and safeguards they rarely think about. They move with the ease of those who will never have. To question whether their toothpaste might be too radiant for comfort. You understand then that the Radium era's legacy is not the blemish it once appeared to be. It is a framework, a reminder that progress needs boundaries, curiosity needs restraint, and optimism needs verification. The mistakes of the past carved out a safer path for the future, one paved with routines so mundane they feel invisible. And as you walk away from the museum, the thought settles into you quietly. The glow may have vanished, but the wisdom it forced upon the world endures, steady and unshining, exactly as it should be. You end in the present, marveling at the stretch of history that unfurls behind you like a strange road paved with good intentions and glowing toothpaste jars. You stand in your own bathroom now, a place lit by normal bulbs and stocked with brushes that do not hum faintly in the dark. You look at your reflection, noticing how ordinary your smile appears without the soft, green halo families once considered the height of sophistication. It is almost funny, in a quiet way, to imagine that brushing your teeth once felt futuristic, patriotic, and mildly radioactive, as though participating in national progress required a small personal glow. You think about how proudly people once welcomed that shimmer into their homes, lining bathroom shelves with jars that promised vitality wrapped in a luminous sheen. You picture families brushing in unison, believing they were doing something brave and modern, something that aligned them with a future so bright it practically pulsed. You imagine the excitement of opening a fresh jar, the thrill of dipping a brush into something that looked like it belonged in a science fiction story. For them, it was not just hygiene, it was hope in a container. The glow whispered that the world was changing, improving, moving forward at a dazzling pace. Now, standing in your quiet space with the mundane smell of mint drifting through the air, you feel a distant affection for those people whose trust came so easily. Their enthusiasm seems both understandable and astonishing. You know how comforting it is to believe that progress always arrives in shining packages, that science always offers certainty, that danger always announces itself with a villainous flare instead of a friendly sparkle. Yet history reminds you that the line between innovation and illusion can be thin, blurred further by charm, marketing, and the irresistible promise of something new. You run water over your toothbrush, watching it foam with nothing more extraordinary than gentle white bubbles. You reflect on how far safety standards have come, How many layers of testing and review now stand between you and the whims of unchecked enthusiasm? It is a legacy shaped by people who once brushed with curiosity and discovered consequences only when it was too late. That legacy lives quietly in your modern products, in the labels you barely read, in the assurances you rarely question, in the confidence you feel when you squeeze a tube that glows only in metaphor. You picture the families of that earlier era, reading bright advertisements and trusting them wholeheartedly. You imagine their cheers for scientific marvels, their certainty that they were stepping into a better world with every glowing stroke. You understand now that their optimism, while sincere, illuminated a truth deeper than any radiance on their toothbrushes. Optimism can glow brighter than wisdom. It can outshine hesitation, overshadow caution, and blind even the most sensible people to risks hiding beneath a beautiful surface. As you place your toothbrush back in its holder, you linger for a moment, letting the quiet settle around you. The present feels steadier because of what the past endured. It feels safer not because the world became kinder, but because it became wiser. The glow faded, but the lesson remained. You turn off the light and step away, carrying with you the strange warmth of knowing that progress is not just about embracing the future. It is also about remembering the moments when the future arrived, wrapped in a shimmer that dazzled more than it enlightened. And as you walk into the rest of your day, you feel grateful for a world where your smile shines only because you brushed your teeth, not because your toothpaste tried to imitate the stars.